Chapter 3162. Translator. Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio. Everyone's eyes turned red. The diameter of the death ray cannon's black energy beam was 20,000 meters. It was terrifying. No one could predict what would happen when it hit the Death Star vortex, which was similar to a small black hole. After all, the energy beam of the death ray cannon was special. The energy that formed the beam was antimatter. As long as it was not cancelled out, it would continue to exist and move forward with inertia. After all, Tian Chenzi was only one of Tian Chenzi's doppelgangers. Moreover, this doppelganger was used to enter the devouring doppelganger formed by the devouring source crystal. Therefore, the main focus was on the cultivation of the primordial spirit. The cultivation of the physical body was not very strong. With Tian Chenzi's level of cultivation, he could not predict what kind of chain reaction would occur when the death ray cannon's energy beam entered the Death Star vortex. The experts from the other forces were caught off guard and did not have the time to use the artificial intelligence center of the fortress to calculate. Although the death ray cannon of the fortress required 2 to 3 minutes to recharge to its maximum, Yixian had obviously started this process long ago. It was 99% done, leaving the last 1% to recharge. It was just for show. Therefore, in less than 10 seconds after Tian Chenzi's words resounded in the vast void, a terrifying black energy beam with a diameter of 20,000 meters shot out from the hull of the fortress. It shot toward the Death Star vortex tens of thousands of kilometers away at an extreme speed. It was only several tens of thousands of kilometers. For the death ray cannon of a universal fortress, it could be considered a close-range shot. This black energy beam hit the center of the deathlight vortex in less than half a second. At this moment, whether it was the experts in the fleets of the surrounding forces, Tian Chenzi and Huai Dongzi in the Black Firmament capital, or the 6 elders of the 6th palace of the 10 ultimates who had concealed their presence with the secret technique of the cultivation camp, all of them held their breaths. Their eyes were wide open, and their faces were filled with shock. There was a deathly silence. Only the faint but sharp buzzing sound of the deathlight cannon's energy beam destroying the void along the way could be heard. Then, an earth-shattering explosion suddenly sounded. Boom! On one side was a pillar of antimatter energy, while on the other side was a vortex of death that devoured all energy, light, and heat like a black hole. As the two gathered together, an extreme burst of energy instantly erupted. This burst was different from normal, and there were no ripples or undulations when the tremendous explosion rang out. The only change was that the vortex of death that resembled a black hole seemed to have deepened because of this. Other than that, there were also faint rays of light that shot out from the death vortex, like tiny water balls that splashed up when raindrops fell into a pool. It was very weak, but there were a lot of them. They were densely packed and spread out in all directions. They were clearly crystals of the same size, only the size of a pigeon's egg. However, their radiance was different, and there were all kinds of colors. Different colors represented different attributes, indicating that although these crystals were the subsidiary products of the devouring marrow essence devouring the energy of this star field to strengthen itself, they belonged to different mineral deposits. Among them, some were devouring source crystals. As expected, tens of thousands of crystals shot out in the blink of an eye. At least 10% of them are devouring source crystals. The rest of the crystals are of high grade and are all important mineral deposits. These guys are probably going to collectively go crazy. Looking at the gorgeous scene of a large number of crystals sputtering in front of him, Yixian immediately became excited. All of this was indeed the result of the deduction and analysis of the devouring system. This death vortex was indeed related to the formation of the entire Death Star field. There were a large number of different high-quality mineral crystals in it, and the devouring source crystals were just one of them. When the death ray cannon fired, under the violent impact of the energy, some of these crystals spilled out in an instant. These spilled crystals, especially the 10% of them that were devouring source crystals, were Yixian's trump card that made the fleets of various forces look on with red eyes. After confirming that Skinny 7 had obtained 10 devouring origin crystals from this place, all of them could not wait any longer. They could not wait to explore this place immediately. After all, some of them could not even obtain 10 devouring origin crystals even after decades of effort. It was only because Yixian's actions were too strange that they were suspicious, so they temporarily suppressed this impulse and forced themselves to hold back. At this moment, the large number of crystals shooting out from the death vortex in front of them was no different from the straw that broke the camel's back. Everyone's eyes turned red at this moment, and exclamations suddenly sounded from all directions. "Oh my God, what am I seeing? Devouring source crystals. So many devouring source crystals. That guy called Scrawny 7 really did get those 10 devouring source crystals from here. It should be a small spill that allowed him to obtain 10 crystals. What we are seeing now is a large spill. How many are there? At least 1,000 devouring source crystals. We're rich, we're rich. We're really rich this time. What are you waiting for? Collect them immediately. Oh my god. There are dozens of devouring source crystals heading straight for us. These are resources that can only be obtained in 100 years, but they actually delivered themselves to us today. Is this the rhythm of a pie falling from the sky? As these exclamations rang out from the warships, all the warships, fortresses, and strongholds that were originally motionless in the void all moved, shooting out beams of absorbing energy. Like a net, they chased after the sputtering crystals in all directions, enveloping them and capturing them. During this process, some of the fleets that had activated concealment formations and hadn't revealed themselves could no longer remain calm. They removed the concealment formations and participated in the capture of the sputtering crystals. However, the huge fleet that belonged to the Tianji clan still didn't show up. In addition, the victorious return fleet under Yi Xian's feet also fell silent after firing the energy beam of the death ray cannon, and didn't do anything else. In less than a minute, the thousands of sputtering crystals were all captured by the beams of absorbing energy and disappeared into the void. Immediately after, the warships of the various forces that had tasted the initial sweetness of the harvest all turned their red eyes toward the death vortex in the star field in front of them. Chapter 3163. Translator, Transin Editor. Transin blowout in the Death Star Zone, only Black Heaven City, which represented the 10 Jianghu celestial palaces, and Old Su City, which represented the Immortal Dynasty, existed. The other forces, big and small, including the various races of the Federation of the Second Universe, as well as the Overlord of the First Universe, the Tianji clan, and their hundreds of servant clans, did not have any fixed bases in this star zone. They lived in warships all year round, moving around everywhere. Even Old Su City, which represented the Immortal Dynasty, had obtained more than 20 devouring source crystals in 10 years. When the Imperial clan elder who was in charge of guarding Old Su City returned to Immortal City, he was so excited that he wanted to show off. One could imagine how rare the devouring source crystals that the other forces, big and small, could obtain under normal circumstances in the Death Star Zone. This was an extremely rare resource to begin with. Otherwise, after discovering that devouring source crystals could be found here, the major forces of the 3 planes of the universe wouldn't have flocked to this place like a swarm of bees. It was also for this reason that, at this moment, when the large and small forces gathered here, in just 1 minute, obtained the devouring source crystals that they could only obtain in hundreds of years, it was easy to imagine how excited the leaders of these fleets were. With just one shot, more than 10,000 crystals had been blasted out of this Death Star vortex. Not only were they all rare minerals, but there were also more than 1,000 devouring source crystals. Where else could they find such a good thing? If one shot was already so good, then what about 10 or 100 shots? Wouldn't there be a blowout on the spot? As soon as they thought of that exciting scene, the commanders and commanders of the fleets of various races in the surrounding void immediately cheered as if they had just been injected with chicken blood. Some of the commanders of the fleets seemed to be afraid that the other fleets would not participate, so they began to broadcast their excited voices through the starry sky loudspeaker system of the flagship of the fleets they were in without any scruples. For a time, all kinds of excited howls resounded in this vast star zone. Those who did not know would think that they had entered a wolf's den. Why are you still in a daze? One shot blasted out more than 1,000 devouring source crystals and countless other rare minerals. There must be a big secret hidden in this Death Star vortex. That's right. Fortunately, they were discovered by us today. Otherwise, wouldn't Black Heaven City have taken advantage of them? The 10 Jianghu Celestial Palace is really something. This Death Star vortex is so close to their base, Black Heaven City. How could they not have explored it? Have you never discovered the secret behind it? That's impossible. Even Skinny 7, who originally belonged to the Eternal Dynasty, was just an ant passing by this place. He was lucky enough to pick up 10 devouring origin crystals here. How could Black Heaven City, which is so close to it, not notice its abnormality? In my opinion, they might have stationed a large number of people around the Death Stellar vortex all the time. Whenever there is a small overflow, they will immediately take care of it. If that's the case, Black Heaven City must have obtained countless Devourer source crystals. No wonder all the major forces in this Death Star area are fighting for the Devourer source crystals. but they are the only ones who are so indifferent. After all this time, they have been silently making a fortune. That's not the point. The point is that there are probably more devourer source crystals in the Death Stellar Vortex, and even more precious minerals. Black Heaven City might have already sent a fleet to explore and excavate. Why should we work so hard outside and only get a dozen devourer source crystals after hundreds of years? But they can send a fleet into the Death Stellar Vortex to collect them. They don't even leave a bite of the meat soup. How shameless! This is the sign of public anger. Everyone, let's fire together and blast them out. Blast them out. Boom. Rumble. Before they could finish, some of the warships had already opened fire. The Starry Fortress fired the death ray cannons, which were black antimatter energy light beams with a diameter of 20,000 meters. For a moment, 6 or 7 of them blasted toward the Death Stellar Vortex from all directions. Among them were a large number of energy light beams fired from the super meteorite cannons and ordinary meteorite cannons from the cosmic level fortresses, the large fortresses with a diameter of 10,000 meters, and even the small fortresses with a diameter of 5,000 meters. The latter was the most abundant, with hundreds of them of different sizes and thicknesses. All of them converged toward the Death Stellar Vortex. The colors of these energy light beams were also different. After all, the warships, fortresses, and fortresses all came from different races. The construction techniques were different, and the driving energy used was also different. This directly led to this result. Hundreds of large and small energy light beams appeared one after another at the same time, all pointing in the same direction. In this dark void with a diameter of tens of thousands of kilometers, it was as if a large energy net had been woven in an instant. It was extremely dazzling and eye-catching. In the face of all this, Xianxia and Huai Dongzi, who had been paying attention to the star field in Black Heaven City, were already shocked to the core. With so many warships, fortresses, and fortresses firing at the same time, if the Death Stellar Vortex couldn't withstand it and was directly blown to pieces, it would cause the void to collapse. At that time, Xianxia's strongest devourer doppelganger, which was still being nurtured inside, would probably die before it could break out of its shell. The situation had reached an extremely critical level. Xianxia couldn't care about anything else. His body trembled as he was about to give the order. It was also at this time that the scene on the huge holographic virtual monitoring screen in front of him changed dramatically again. What was displayed on the monitoring screen was the situation around the Death Stellar Vortex. At this moment, as the hundreds to thousands of star cannon energy beams of different sizes shot out and bombarded different locations in the huge Death Stellar Vortex one after another, a series of earth-shattering explosions abruptly rang out. Rumble. Boom! Amidst the huge explosion, the entire Death Star Vortex, which was like a small black hole, was instantly torn apart by more than a dozen small holes that were more than 100 kilometers long. Faintly mottled rays of light were shooting out from the holes, getting closer and closer. Pooh! Pooh pew pew. More than a dozen loud, muffled sounds rang out in succession. From the void cracks that had been blasted open in the Death Stellar Vortex, more than a dozen giant crystal pillars formed by countless crystals instantly shot out like a geyser. After soaring hundreds of kilometers into the sky, they splashed in all directions like water pillars. The only difference was that what splashed were not water droplets, but mottled crystals of different colors. Among them, even if the number of devourer source crystals was less than 10%, it was already an unimaginably terrifying number. The geyser had finally erupted. At this moment, even Yi Shen's mouth was wide open. He never expected that there would be such a huge amount of devourer source crystals in this Death Stellar Vortex. Chapter 3164. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Turbulent Retreat. Heavens! We're rich. We're really rich this time. At a glance, there are at least hundreds of thousands of devouring source crystals. I've never seen so many in my life. Not to mention seeing it with my own eyes. This old man has never even heard of it. We've really hit the jackpot this time. Not only have you seen and heard of it, I didn't even dare to think about it. This Death Star Vortex is obviously a huge treasure trove of minerals. It's hard to find even in the 3 universes. Damn it, I don't know how many benefits those guys from Black Sky City have gotten from it. Haven't you noticed? Until now, they haven't shown up. This is obviously because they have a guilty conscience. They know that they've angered the public, and they've gotten enough benefits, so they simply don't show up. Yes, this should be the case. Didn't you see? In the void on the west side, a huge silver fleet has appeared. It's obviously the Tianji fleet from the Tianji clan. With such a huge amount of devouring source crystals appearing like a geyser, even the public enemy, the Tianji clan, couldn't sit still and show up to fight for it. But Black Sky City hasn't arrived yet. This is enough to explain the problem. Whatever, they can run away, but the temple can't. Let's get the benefits in front of us first, then we'll go back and attack Black Sky City together. The Immortal Dynasty was also kept in the dark this time. Black Sky City has eaten all the benefits alone. Presumably, this time, they will join forces with us from the second universe and attack the Tenju Celestial Palace. We must make them spit out some. They've deceived us for so long, for thousands of years. It's really too hateful. Everyone, let's do it together. Devouring source crystals is like a sea. Don't just rob. We're all from the Federation. At this time, we have to have a sense of teamwork. We can't let the Tianji clan get too many benefits. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh whoosh! As these words rang out, beams of light of various sizes appeared from the dozens of fleets around them. Even the Heaven's Legacy race fleet, which was made up of hundreds of warships, fortresses, and fortresses to the west, unleashed a large number of beams of light. In an instant, a large number of rare minerals and origin crystals that were gushing out from the dozens of void rifts in the Death Stellar vortex were plundered by the beams of light that interweaved like a net of light. It was a lively and crazy scene. For the fleets of various forces that were gathered in the surroundings, this was definitely the happiest moment in hundreds or thousands of years. All the fleets of the various factions, including the Heaven's Legacy race, gradually went crazy from the plundering. Only Yi Xian's victorious return fleet quietly began to retreat at this moment. He knew that these fellows in front of him, who had fallen into a state of ecstasy, would definitely be like him after they became even crazier. They would definitely think of the Death Star vortex that could spew out such a huge amount of rare minerals and devour origin crystals. Yi Xian's purpose in coming here was only to devour source crystals. Even the current situation of gushing out source crystals had exceeded his greatest expectations. This should have been something to be happy about because it meant that everyone would be happy and reap a great harvest this time. However, Yi Xian had always firmly believed in one principle, and that was that there must be something wrong when something abnormal happened. For this Death Stellar vortex to be gushing out such a huge amount of origin crystals meant that there must be great treasures inside, and treasures of this level also meant great danger. The reason Yi Xian retreated at this moment was not because he was aware of the danger and was preparing to retreat. He just wanted to increase the safe distance between them a little more. For a Death Stellar vortex that was more than 10,000 kilometers in size, just keeping a distance of tens of thousands of kilometers from it really made Yi Xian feel uneasy. Moreover, Black Sky City had been sitting in this Death Stellar vortex for thousands of years. Yi Xian would never believe that they did not know the secrets of the Death Stellar vortex. However, the people of Black Sky City had not yet appeared, which was also suspicious. Yi Xian quietly retreated at this moment to observe Black Sky City's follow-up measures was also one of the reasons why he did so. As for the great treasure in the Death Stellar vortex that he had his eyes on, he was not worried at all. The people in front of him, who were already faintly ecstatic, were not a single entity. On the contrary, they were composed of dozens of fleets of almost 100 alien races, and even included the natural enemy of the Wan Luo Federation, the Heaven's Legacy race. Even if the great treasure in the Death Stellar vortex appeared, it was absolutely impossible for any force's fleet to instantly suppress all the other fleets and take the lead in such a short period of time. Since that was the case, Yi Xian had plenty of time to retreat and watch from afar. It would be best if this group of people fought to the death and suffered heavy losses. At that time, it would be better for him to seize the final advantage. That little bastard Long Xian really has a problem. Just as the victorious return fleet was slowly and orderly retreating under Yi Xian's order, in Black Sky City, millions of kilometers away, Tian Chenzi, whose face was already extremely ferocious, was so angry that he laughed. His eyes were fixed on the holographic virtual screen in the main hall, and he gnashed his teeth. All the other fleets are madly competing for the rare minerals and devouring origin crystals that are erupting out of the vortex. Even the always stable and mysterious Tianji fleet can't sit still and show up. But at this moment, he ordered the fleet to retreat. The legendary Prince Xian isn't such a coward. It's obvious that this guy has a bigger plan. He clearly wants to temporarily withdraw from the situation and wait until everything is clear before reaping the benefits of the third party. At this point, the expression on Tian Chenzi's face became more and more ferocious, and even a little crazy. He continued in a hateful voice. Everything that happened today was all because of him. Even if I ordered the activation of the Heaven and Earth Reversal 5 Elements teleportation technique, and moved all the fleets within 100,000 kilometers of the Death Stellar Vortex into the void-killing array that has long been set up in the depths of the Sixth Palace's core, but now that the Death Stellar Vortex has been tossed into such a huge commotion, I'm afraid that even the star regions that are 100,000 kilometers away can clearly see what is happening. The range of the array can only reach 100,000 kilometers at most, and the starry sky masters outside this area will not be affected in the slightest. Even if Black Heaven City pursues with all its might after the event, it is difficult to guarantee that some fish will escape the net in such a vast Death Star region. In other words, the news of this body's strongest devouring avatar being nurtured is likely to be leaked out this time. Damned Long Xian, he actually wants to sit back and reap the benefits after creating such a huge trouble for this body? Ha ha ha. In the end, Xianxia was so angry that he laughed. His entire person seemed to have gone crazy. He immediately roared and used the secret communication technique of the Tenju Celestial Palaces to order the 6 elders of the 6th Palace who were hibernating in the void around the Death Stellar Vortex to activate the Heaven and Earth Reversal 5 Elements teleportation technique. Since you have already entered the game, don't expect to escape unscathed. Little bastard, I will personally send you on your way. Chapter 3165. Translator, Audiobook Studio Editor. Audiobook Studio Intercept, Rumble. Whoosh whoosh. The void around the Death Star Vortex was in chaos. All kinds of air-breaking sounds were raging, and countless beams of light were intertwining and flashing. The victorious return stronghold beneath Yi Xian's feet had already brought along 2 other 50,000-meter diameter star-level strongholds, 4 10,000-meter diameter star-level battleships, and a total of 17 large and small battleships, fortresses, and strongholds that formed a defensive formation. They floated in the dark void and began to slowly retreat. In other directions around the entire fleet, the 3 Demon Scout fortresses, Black Mosquito, Black Wind, and Saint, as well as Lightning Fortress, had all activated the concealment array and were also slowly retreating. In just a little more than a minute, the entire victorious return fleet was already 60 to 70,000 kilometers away from the edge of the vast Death Stellar Vortex. If they continued to retreat, they would be 100,000 kilometers away in another 2 minutes. But the fleet obviously didn't stop there, and was still slowly retreating. It was also at this moment that a sudden change occurred, and it came from the rear of the fleet's retreat. Boom! A terrifying aura swept over from the distance. A moment ago it was still more than 1,000,000 kilometers away, but in the blink of an eye, it was already close to 100,000 kilometers behind the fleet. A cold, rolling gray air burst out, and 2 figures with their hands behind their backs appeared, hanging on a cloud. They were Xianxia and Huai Dongzi, who had just rushed out of Black Heaven City. A distance of millions of kilometers was actually covered in the blink of an eye. This was clearly because Huai Dongzi had used all his strength. The full speed of a cosmic light realm expert, who was at the 14th Great Realm, had even far surpassed the 10 diameters of the Starry Sky Fortress. All this was unexpected even for Yi Xian. When the 2 figures appeared on the giant holographic virtual screen in the command cabin on the top floor of the Victorious Return, his expression changed instantly. A thought flashed through his mind, and he subconsciously muttered to himself, Black Heaven City? Huai Dongzi. That young man should be the young palace master of the 6th palace of the 10 absolutes, Xianxia. But why is even Huai Dongzi standing half a step behind him? At the same time, the expression of Naples who stood by his side changed abruptly, and he cried out involuntarily with shock. What terrifying speed! Huai Dongzi has clearly utilized his full strength to rush over at extreme speed. He arrived in such a menacing manner and directly blocked off our path of retreat. What does he intend to do? Your Highness, please use the space jump. I have a bad feeling that something big is going to happen. Boom! Before Naples could finish his words, Huai Dongzi, with a sneer on his face, had already turned his head toward the eastern edge of the fleet. That was where the Holy Sun ship and Lightning Fortress were located. Immediately after, without waiting for Yi Xian to recover from his shock, Huai Dongzi directly raised his hand and punched. There wasn't any shocking aura that rose up, but from a distance of 100,000 kilometers, he silently caused a huge fireball to explode out of thin air in the space where Lightning Fortress and the Saint Child were located, illuminating a large area of space red. The fireball was about 10,000 meters in diameter, and it was clearly the Holy Sun ship that was destroyed by his punch. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. At the same time, he quickly received a notification from the devouring system in his mind. The personal space communication system attached to the system had just received a message from the Lightning Fortress. The moment before the other party attacked, the central star brain of the Lightning Fortress had quickly analyzed the danger and teleported in advance. Now, it was already hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. It was just a punch, but from a distance of 100,000 kilometers, he had easily destroyed a demon scout fortress that was 10,000 meters in diameter. The cultivation of the cosmic light realm expert, who was at the 14th great realm, was actually this terrifying. Yi Xian's face was ashen. Although there were not many direct demon slaves who had followed him in the beginning on the Holy Sun ship, and even the mosquito beasts and soldiers were not stationed inside, the Holy Sun ship still had 3,000-man demon slave brigades that he had taken in the Black Mosquito tribe later on. In just an instant, he had lost a large fortress and 3,000 demon slaves. Furthermore, the other party's actions had undoubtedly illustrated a problem. That was, the Black Mosquito ship and the other 4 fortresses that had activated their concealment formations were completely defenseless in his eyes. Yi Xian could still accept the destruction of the Holy Sun ship, but if the Black Mosquito ship and the Black Wind ship were destroyed as well, Yi Xian would really go completely crazy. The direct demon slaves who had followed him in the beginning, including the mosquito beasts and the soldiers, were all in these 2 demon fortresses. There was absolutely no room for failure. Naples, after leaving behind a small fortress and all 10 stellar warships, use all your strength to provide cover and bombardment. All other warships under your command immediately jump, including the Black Wind ship and the Black Mosquito ship. Now. Yi Xian suddenly roared as his figure was exposed. At the same time, he turned his head and swept a glance at Ying Tai. You and Naples evacuate together. This prince will be there in a moment. After saying this, he took a step forward and instantly exited the command cabin on the top floor of the Fortress of Triumph. His figure appeared in the void of death outside the ship. According to his orders, apart from the Black Mosquito ship and the Black Wind ship, the rest of the Triumph fleet, the Fortress of Triumph where Naples and Ying Tai were, and another small stellar warship, as well as the 4 large fortresses with a diameter of 10,000 meters, were to quickly jump and evacuate. As for the sacrifice of bringing up the rear, there was only 1 small fortress and 10 stellar warships, which were definitely not enough to hold back Huaidongzi. These 11 warships, in addition to the Holy Sun ship that had already been destroyed, were already the limits of what Yi Xian could bear. If they were to suffer any more losses, the defenses of Triumph City would be stretched to the limit. As such, Yi Xian could only take action himself. He even left Ying Tai behind. Facing the supreme existence of the 14th Great Realm, the Cosmic Light Realm, Ying Tai would only be courting death if she went. Only he could rely on the demonic dragon's phantom, the Weeping Soul Bloodhorn, the Thunder Origin Orb, or the Headless Infant's corpse to successfully hold back or even severely injure the enemy while ensuring his own safety. These 4 were currently Yi Xian's strongest trump cards. He could easily achieve this effect by randomly choosing any one of them. As such, Yi Xian was completely fearless. Your Highness! At the same instant that Yi Xian's figure appeared beside him, Naples suddenly cried out in alarm. He couldn't abandon Prince Xian and take the majority of the troops to escape by jumping through space. No matter what, he couldn't do it. What made Naples even more shocked was that at this instant, the wretched mosquito slayer, who had been shrinking his head, suddenly released a terrifying aura that wasn't the slightest bit weaker than Huaidongzi's. In fact, it was clearly even more powerful. Let's go. You'll only be a burden if you stay. Although the Cosmic Light Realm is strong, with me around, no one can hurt him. Furthermore, he doesn't need it. At this instant, the wretched mosquito slayer had completely changed into a different person. With his hands behind his back, he put on the demeanor of a pretentious expert. He looked into the distant void outside the warship and muttered to himself, "Is that Tian Chenzi's aura? So it's actually one of his clones, but it's actually so weak. Interesting." Chapter 3166. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio Mosquito Butcher unleashes its might, rumble, boom. As the Saint's ship was blown apart by the punch, a large number of warships in the Victorious Return fleet opened fire at the same time. Except for the death ray cannon in the Victorious Return fortress, which had just fired and was still charging, the other warships, large fortresses, and small fortresses all fired super meteor cannon energy beams at Tianquanzi and Huaidongzi. The death ray cannon may be able to make this sovereign feel a little apprehensive, but this kind of attack, is useless against this sovereign. Huai Dongzi sneered and spoke again. This time, he did not throw a punch but waved his hand. A series of explosions rang out as 5 or 6 3,000-meter-long stellar warships instantly exploded into terrifying giant fireballs, illuminating the void. At the same time, the victorious return fortress and the other large fortresses were also attacked. However, after the Saint ship was destroyed, all the warships immediately activated their energy shields, so the other large fortresses were unharmed for the time being. Even if the 3,000-meter-long stellar warship's energy shields were fully activated, they could not withstand a blow from a cosmic realm powerhouse. Of course, this was also because Huai Dongzi's attack seemed casual, but in fact, he was prepared. Even if he did not use his full strength, it was at least quite deliberate. Stop! As a cosmic realm powerhouse, you actually use some weak stellar warships to show off your power. Old thing, don't you feel ashamed? At this time, Yi Xian had just stepped out of the victorious return fortress when he suddenly saw this scene. In the blink of an eye, 6 or 7 stellar warships had been lost, and there were more than 1,000 Neapolitan soldiers on board. Such a loss immediately made his heart twitch, and his eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Suddenly he roared, "This prince will meet you." With just you? Before Yi Xian finished speaking, Huai Dongzi was so angry that he laughed. As the palace master of the 6th Absolute Palace, he was really embarrassed to be reprimanded by a Nebula Realm ant right in front of him. This old man knows you have some means and once forced that trash Long Ziwen to retreat in Old Sioux City. However, he has just stepped into the cosmic realm, and this old man is already at the 6th level. Brat, be careful not to cut your tongue. As he spoke, he was still tens of thousands of kilometers away, still looking like he was about to throw a punch at Yi Xian. At this level, the Misty Translation Studio editor, Chunzi Dongzi Studio was editor, Studio Divine and Art Studio. The 6th level realm what? At this moment, the wretched mosquito slayer stepped out of Fortress Triumph and rolled his eyes. He didn't even look at Huai Dongzi. His triangular eyes flickered as he looked at Tian Chenzi with a smile. A fierce pressure surged from his body, far surpassing Huai Dongzi's. He was definitely not at the same level as Huai Dongzi. He was at least a supreme master of the 15th level, the universe realm. At this moment, Tian Chenzi, Huai Dongzi, and Yi Xian all subconsciously turned to look. Yi Xian's body shook as if he had seen a ghost, his mouth wide open. Tian Chenzi's expression changed wildly, and his eyes flickered with malice. Huai Dongzi exclaimed in shock, "Old man mosquito slayer? Why are you here? Aren't you dead? This is impossible." "Dead, your sister? You, a mere vice palace master, dare to call this old man by his name?" The wretched mosquito slayer rolled his eyes again, and then his expression darkened. He suddenly shouted, "Scram!" Rumble. Without any warning, a terrifying and majestic spiritual power gushed out from the wretched mosquito slayer's body. In an instant, it whistled and turned into a huge vortex, directly crashing into Tian Chenzi and Huai Dongzi. Boom! A huge explosion rang out, and the mountain-like gray mist cloud beneath the two of them instantly collapsed. Huai Dongzi's lips curled into a smile as his body flew backwards like a kite with a broken string. In the blink of an eye, he was tens of thousands of kilometers away. In stark contrast, Tian Chenzi, who was still standing half a step in front of him, did not move at all. However, his face was pale as he clenched his teeth tightly. Although he did not say anything, his eyes were filled with despair. Obviously, the reason why he was not sent flying was not because he was stronger than Huai Dongzi, but because the wretched mosquito slayer had deliberately left him behind. This was clearly a sign that he wanted to take care of him properly. Such a majestic attack, but the effect was so precise. One person was sent flying tens of thousands of kilometers, while the other did not move at all. Just this kind of control of power was no small matter, and it caused Yi Xian's body to tremble violently again. Spiritual storm? Level 9 spiritual power? Who are you? As his body trembled violently, Yi Xian turned to look at the wretched mosquito slayer and exclaimed in shock. What his opponent had just used was the spiritual power secret technique Yi Xian also mastered, spiritual storm. Of course, compared to the effect that Yi Xian had displayed, it was definitely like a firefly competing with the moon. After all, the difference in cultivation strength was obvious. However, he was able to heavily injure a supreme powerhouse of the cosmic light realm with just a spiritual secret technique that couldn't even be considered a divine ability, and sent him flying for several tens of thousands of kilometers. This indirectly proved the wretched mosquito slayer's cultivation level. It definitely far surpassed the cosmic realm, and was at least the supreme existence of the 15th great realm, the universe realm, or even stronger. Even Ying Tai was inferior to an ant in front of him. However, such a powerhouse had called him master for half a year. Just thinking about this made Yi Xian feel a chill run down his spine. He felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. More importantly, this guy's spiritual power was clearly at level 9, which meant that his spiritual source core had already undergone its 8th transformation and was now a level 9 source core. This was something that Yi Xian could not accept no matter what. Even the Mad Mosquito Emperor only had a level 8 source core. Legend had it that the first demon-human emperor also had a level 8 source core. However, the person in front of him had a level 9 source core. Didn't this mean that he could invade Yi Xian's mind at any time? The spiritual imprint left behind by the Mad Mosquito Emperor, which had been condensed from level 8 spiritual power, simply could not block the probing of his level 9 spiritual power. Am I not the Mosquito Slayer, Master? That's what that old thing called me. Didn't you hear it? When he met Yi Xian's gaze, the wretched mosquito slayer's demeanor disappeared in an instant. Instead, he smiled bashfully, his triangular eyes looking extremely wretched. As he spoke, he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion toward his forehead. 2 gloomy rays of light rushed out of his head and landed in his palms. He opened them up and showed them to Yi Xian. Look, these are the 2 spiritual imprints that you planted in my source core one after the other. Am I right? In his palms were the 2 spiritual source cores that Yi Xian had planted in his head. There was no doubt that they were of different grades. Yi Xian was completely sure of that aura. More importantly, this kind of spiritual imprint had clearly been lost among the demons. Besides Yi Xian, no one else would be able to condense it. However, all this proved that the wretched mosquito slayer in front of him was indeed the one he had first met. Why exactly was he still calling him master? Yi Xian's mind was in a complete mess. When Xianxia heard the wretched mosquito slayer call Yi Xian master, his expression changed abruptly. When he looked at him again, his expression was extremely complicated. Chapter 3167. Death of Xianxia. This old man also didn't think that we would actually meet so soon. Although I had predicted that I would meet an old friend in the next few days, I didn't expect it to be you. Moreover, it's only a clone. The wretched mosquito slayer retracted his gaze from Yi Xian and looked at Xianxia. He then raised his hand and pointed at the Death Star vortex behind him. He grinned and said, I can see that although the cultivation of this clone of yours is not high enough, the Yuan spirit that is split is extremely stable. In this situation, it should be used for possession, right? From the looks of it, there should be a very powerful clone in the Death Stellar vortex. It's like an infant without any consciousness, and it'll immediately become a new clone of yours as soon as your soul enters it. For you to value it so much, this clone must be very valuable and important. TSK, TSK, TSK. Tell me, how lucky am I? Although I'm not interested in that clone, according to my calculations, it's not fated to be mine. But just being able to spoil your good deed is already a very good thing for me. Furthermore, according to this old man's calculations, that clone will ultimately benefit my new lord. You're the one who's in charge of this matter. Thank you. Puh. Hearing the vulgar words coming out of the mouth of the vulgar mosquito butcher, then looking at his extremely vulgar and extremely shameless face, which clearly belonged to the type of person who wanted to play the victim even after gaining an advantage, Xianxia's complexion turned from white to black, then from black to green, and finally into a purplish color. He was so angry that he opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. His spirit instantly weakened by 30%. It was obvious that he had suffered serious internal injuries. Furthermore, his primordial spirit had been injured. This immediately stunned Yi Xian. He had heard of people who were so angry that they vomited blood, but what kind of ghost was this to injure his own primordial spirit? My lord? Just him? Ha ha! Raising his hand to wipe away the trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, Xianxia laughed wildly with a sinister expression. He glanced at Yi Xian with a face full of disdain. Don't think that this lord can't see through it. This brat's cultivation is indeed at the first stage of Nebula Realm. He isn't hiding it at all. The so-called Prince Xian's divine sense is nothing more than a hoax. An immortal dynasty, it really makes one speechless. As it happens, even you, Mosquito Butcher, have fallen into the trap. You've calculated your entire life, and in the end, you've actually counted yourself as the servant of a nebula realm ant. Ha ha ha. Mosquito Butcher, your heaven measuring technique really disappoints me. There's no point in talking too much. We'll find out in the future. What's most important is what's in front of us right now. To be able to ruin one of Tian Chenzi's plans, this old man has gained quite a bit today. Goodbye, old friend. Boom. The wretched Mosquito Butcher grinned again. His triangular eyes flashed wildly, and in an instant, he looked extremely wretched. Before he finished speaking, a similarly majestic spiritual storm suddenly surged out of his body and instantly enveloped Tian Chenzi. The latter knew that this doppelganger was bound to die, so he actually self-detonated one step ahead of time. With a boom, his entire body suddenly exploded. His voice was like a ghost's scream, instantly spreading through the endless void. Array, rise! Little kid, this lord will wait for you in the 6th palace. Ha ha! Whoosh! At the same time, from the flesh and blood that Tian Chenzi had suddenly self-detonated, a tiny gray light instantly shot out. Even the wretched Mosquito Butcher's spiritual storm couldn't stop it. In an instant, it crossed hundreds of thousands of kilometers and rushed into the Death Star vortex in the void in front of them in the blink of an eye. It plunged in and disappeared. You still haven't given up? Unfortunately, this old man's heaven measuring technique is definitely not wrong. That doppelganger in the Death Star vortex is not fated to be with you. The wretched Mosquito Butcher frowned and turned to look in the direction of the Death Star vortex. He curled his lips and sneered. Boom! Boom! Right at this moment, in the void outside the Death Stellar vortex, in 6 different directions, 100,000 kilometers away, an earth-shattering explosion suddenly rang out. From these 6 directions, 6 shocking pillars of energy shot up into the sky, exuding an incomparably dense and ancient aura. At this moment, it was as if the sun, moon, and stars in the heavens had all sensed it. In the void within a radius of 100,000 miles, countless poisonous flames and astral winds blasted out from the 6 pillars of energy that shot up into the sky. In an instant, this vast void within a radius of 100,000 kilometers was turned into a prison. The 6 huge energy light pillars were the foundation pillars of the array. After shooting up into the sky, they bloomed and spread out, spreading out into a huge net in the boundless sky. This was the power of the desolate era treasure, the 9 heavens and 10 earths demon-repelling divine shuttle. This treasure was forged and tempered with 1,000-year-old fine iron in the deep cold abyss for 10,000 years, and then molded bit by bit with the 10,000-year-old ice of the North Pole. It did not use the slightest bit of pure yang qi. It could go anywhere it wanted and was impervious to all evils. At this moment, when the array was activated, it instantly turned into a total of 91 huge shuttle-shaped magical treasures. They shuttled back and forth between the 6 energy light pillars, leaving behind a trail of energy flames. In less than a breath, the entire void was covered with countless array chains, sealing everything. Including Yi Xian, the wretched Mosquito Butcher, and the more than 1,000 warships of the dozens of large and small forces in the surrounding void, were all sealed. Only Yi Xian's victorious return fleet, except for the 6 or 7 star-level warships that had been destroyed by Huai Dongzi with a wave of his hand, as well as the Saint ship, had all performed a space jump before the array was activated, escaping to the array area 100,000 kilometers away. At this moment, in the void hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, all the experts in the warships were looking in this direction. All of them were shocked. In the void 100,000 kilometers outside the Death Star vortex, thousands of warships, fortresses, and starry sky fortresses of all sizes had been wiped out. Although they were only trapped and sealed by this huge desolate era strange array, there was no doubt that something bad was going to happen. Everyone knew that something big was going to happen. To play such a big game of chess, Black Heaven City was indeed very generous. The great art of reversing heaven and earth 5 elements shifting? They even used such desolate era treasures as the 9 heavens and 10 earths demon-repelling divine shuttle and the all heavens mystic demon dark shuttle? What kind of powerful doppelganger is Tian Chenzi nurturing in this Death Star vortex? How could he be so generous as to risk using palace-level desolate era treasures? Seeing this scene, the wretched Mosquito Butcher's expression changed. As he spoke, he suddenly thought of something and cried out involuntarily, "Oh no, with these 2 desolate era treasures, As soon as the great art of reversing heaven and earth 5-element shifting is launched, it can instantly lock onto the core area of the 6th palace of the 10 Ultimates 10 palaces and accurately teleport the target of this secret technique to it. There's no mistake. The old man wants to shift everyone in the array area and bring them back to the core area of the 6th palace of the 10 Ultimates 10 palaces to silence them. There must be a void-killing array already set up there. There's only one chance. Quickly rush into the Death Star vortex. Only in this way can you avoid being moved by the array. Chapter 3168. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation The Great Escape, boom. This time, the wretched mosquito slayer used the same mental power secret technique that Xianxia had mastered, but its power was much more powerful than the mental storm from before. Destruction Vortex. The demon's mental power that surged out of his body was far more powerful than before, and it instantly formed a huge mental power vortex that soared into the sky. In addition to Mosquito Slayer's level 9 mental power, he had reached the peak of the demon's mental power, and its power was unpredictable. In the blink of an eye, a huge gap was created in the cage formed by countless energy beams of different sizes. Unfortunately, this gap did not lead to any other direction, but to the death vortex in front. Obviously, the wretched mosquito slayer still could not forget the strongest devouring doppelganger that Xianxia had secretly nurtured in the death vortex. This time, he used the destruction vortex to open a path for Xianxia, and it was also directed to the death vortex. Xianxia had no choice but to wave his hand and summon the Dongshu shuttle with a bitter smile. He stepped into it and immediately turned the shuttle into a purple light that rushed into the death vortex. At this moment, the wretched mosquito slayer's figure disappeared in the blink of an eye, but he did not rush into the death vortex in front. Instead, after he rushed out of the void cage and was about to enter the death vortex, he forcefully pulled himself out of it with some great magical power. Then, he suddenly paused and rushed in the direction of the victorious return fleet. Just as the Dongshu shuttle entered the death vortex, his voice was clearly heard. I've already calculated with the heaven measuring technique. Although Master is going to be in danger, you'll definitely be able to turn the misfortune into a blessing in the end, and you'll also have a great harvest. From now on, you'll soar into the sky. Don't worry, I'll be guarding Planet Victorious Return. As long as the 10 palace masters of the 10 ultimate celestial palaces don't come in person, you'll be safe. At the same time, the thousands of battleships, fortresses, and strongholds of the dozens of fleets from various forces in the void cage that was 100,000 miles away were in an uproar at this moment. The scene that had occurred in the void tens of thousands of kilometers away was a long story. But in truth, from the moment Hui Dongzi and Xianxia appeared to the moment Xianxia self-destructed, only half a minute had passed. In such a short period of time, all the masters in the dozens of fleets near the Death Star Vortex were originally focused on competing for the rare minerals and source crystals that had erupted from the Death Star Vortex, so no one paid attention to what was happening in the distant void. In such a hurry, no one was able to react. It wasn't until Xianxia self-detonated and activated the great shifting technique of the 5 elements that all the experts in the starry sky suddenly realized that they had fallen into the trap of Black Heaven City. Unfortunately, the array formation had already been activated. Not all existences had the ability to escape. Before this void cage was fully formed, only 6 starry sky fortresses managed to escape. 5 of them were the flagship fortresses of the 5 large fleets belonging to the various forces of the Federation in the Second Universe. The other one was one of the 2 flagship fortresses of the Heavenly Legacy clan. The rest, including the Celestial Legacy race's other interstellar fortress and the Celestial Legacy interstellar fortress personally guarded by old-time dragon Ziwen, were all trapped in the void cage formed by the formation. There were still thousands of battleships, fortresses, and strongholds of various sizes. They were so densely packed that it was a shocking sight. Some of the stellar-level battleships, which were 3,000 meters long, had been activated by the great shifting technique of the 5 elements. The moment the great shifting technique of the 5 elements blasted out countless poisonous flames and astral winds from the 6 energy light pillars into the sky, they completely exploded into giant balls of flames. There were at least 200 or 300 of them. All the battleships and fortresses had been preoccupied with fighting for the source crystals and hadn't even activated their defensive shields. The large fortresses with a diameter of more than 10,000 meters were fine. They could withstand the power of the array formation for a short period of time. Then, they could activate their defensive shields. At least they would be fine for the time being. But the stellar-level battleships, which were 3,000 meters long, didn't even have the chance to do so. The moment the array formation was activated, they exploded under the power of the array formation. In an instant, hundreds of huge fireballs exploded in the void of this cage that was 100,000 kilometers in size. Accompanied by the energy pillars of the formation and the light emitted by the rare mineral deposits that erupted, they were extremely dazzling under the contrast of each other. The entire vast void was like a dream. All the experts in the starry sky who had escaped from the void cage and were watching from the center of the void in the distance were dumbfounded and absent-minded. It was also at this moment that the wretched mosquito slayer used the destructive vortex and forcibly blasted a passage through the great shifting technique of the 5 elements, which led directly to the Death Star vortex. Then, Yi Xian's Dongshu shuttle rushed into the vortex. At least, they had left the void cage that was sealed by the great shifting technique of the 5 elements. And if they stayed here, they would be in big trouble. All the experts in the void cage were well aware of this. Therefore, although they were also wary of the Death Star vortex in front of them, at least someone had taken the lead and rushed in. This was the only way out. And compared to this void cage that only had endless dangers waiting to befall them, at least the Death Star vortex in front of them clearly contained a large number of source crystals. They might be able to snatch more if they risked their lives. How could one catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den? In an instant, the eyes of all the experts trapped in the void cage turned red. Fortresses and fortresses of various sizes, as well as the surviving stellar-level warships, all scrambled to be the first to leave. In the blink of an eye, several interstellar fortresses followed closely behind Yi Xian and rushed into the Death Star vortex. Immediately after, a few more cosmic state fortresses charged in. Finally, there were more than 10 large fortresses with diameters of 10,000 meters. In just 5 to 6 seconds, more than 10 warships rushed into the Death Star vortex after the Dongshu shuttle, the smallest of which was a large fortress with a diameter of 10,000 meters. It was also at this moment that the escape tunnel that the wretched mosquito slayer forcefully created with a destructive vortex finally disappeared. The power of the great array of the 5-element shifting technique, which reversed the universe, cancelled out the power of the destructive vortex's mental power in less than 10 seconds, and the gap was instantly repaired. At this point, the chaotic escape of all the warships trapped in this void cage had finally come to an end. There were still nearly 1,000 warships remaining within the range of the formation, struggling left and right like trapped beasts. Their cannons were firing wildly, but to no avail. They couldn't rush out at all, but there were still nearly 1,000 warships. Hum. The frequency was so fast that it caused the void to tremble violently at this moment. The Death Star vortex that was 100,000 kilometers away suddenly burst into a dazzling light, causing all the starry sky experts in the center of the void to subconsciously close their eyes at the same time. The next moment, when they opened their eyes again, the entire star field where the void cage was located was already empty. Everyone and everything within 100,000 kilometers of the void, including the erupting rare mineral deposits and nearly 1,000 warships, had completely disappeared without a trace. It was only at this moment that Huai Dongzi, who had been blasted out of the endless void by the wretched mosquito slayer, arrived. He saw that the formation had already completed its shift, but there were still nearly 100 warships of various forces in the void in the distance. Almost all of them were fortresses and small fortresses. Obviously, it was impossible to kill all of them. Chapter 3169. Translator. Audiobook Studio Editor. Audiobook Studio. Another egg. Whoosh. Rumble. Whoosh. The sound of the air breaking rang out densely, accompanied by some loud booming noises. This was already the interior of the Death Stellar Vortex. No one knew what had happened to the void of the Death Stellar domain after the Heaven and Earth Reversal 5-element shifting technique had been fully activated and completed the shift. Everyone who had successfully escaped into the Death Star Vortex, including Yi Xian, was not in the mood to think about what was happening outside. This was because they were still in danger and had no time to think about anything else. To be more precise, they had just escaped from a dragon's den and now they had fallen into a tiger's den. Before they could recover, new trouble had already befallen them. From the outside, the Death Star Vortex looked like a small black hole. It was for this reason that although many starry sky experts knew about this place, none of them had actually entered it, except for Xianxia. Black holes were extremely dangerous. They could even swallow light, let alone other things. Therefore, no one would be so bored as to casually explore an unknown black hole. In fact, the inside of the Death Star Vortex was not much different from an ordinary black hole. It was also a dark world. There was not even any light or heat. In a sense, the Death Star vortex was actually a black hole in the universe in another sense. They were essentially the same. Black holes were formed by the extreme collapse of the void after the Big Bang. They swallowed all light and heat, including light. As for the Death Star vortex, although it did not explode before it was formed, it contained a devouring marrow essence that could devour all light, heat, and light. Therefore, its meaning and essence was not much different from a black hole. The only difference was that all the light and heat, as well as the energy of the universe, were being devoured by the Death Star vortex. They were all converging in one place, which was the deepest core of the Death Star vortex. There was a giant crystal egg there. It was also the place where Xianxia's strongest devouring doppelganger was born. At this moment, the scene inside the Death Star vortex had already stunned all the Starry Sky experts who had escaped into this place, including Yi Xian. Apart from Yi Xian's Dongshu shuttle, which was only a small private battleship, the rest of the spaceships were at least 10,000 meters in diameter. There were 7 large fortresses, 5 small cosmic-level fortresses, and 300,000-meter-wide cosmic fortresses. In total, there were 15 giant battleships. Among them, there were 3 universal fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters. One of them belonged to the Tianji race, while the other 2 belonged to 2 of the races of the Second Universe Federation. The other 12 big fortresses and small strongholds belonged to different races in the Second Universe. The giant battleships that entered the Death Star vortex belonged to different powers. No 2 belonged to the same power. The 3 universal fortresses were overseen by existences at the 12th level, the Void Realm. Even the upper echelon of the Heaven's Legacy race's fortress was the same. The strongest expert of the Heaven's Legacy race stationed in the Death Star vortex was also a supreme existence at the 14th level, the Cosmic Light Realm. However, that existence was in another universal fortress of the Heaven's Legacy race. At this moment, he had been teleported to the core-killing array of the 6th palace of the 10 ultimate celestial palaces in the human clan's camp by the great technique of 5 elements reversal. Right now, the 15 giant battleships of various powers and Yi Xian's small private battleship, Dongshu shuttle, were in different areas. After entering the Death Star vortex, they did not gather in the same area. However, all the battleships were moving toward the same target at full speed. There was a giant crystal egg there. Although it was called giant, it was only relative to the material it was made of. In fact, this giant crystal egg was not very big. It was only about 3 meters tall. However, its entire body was formed by the devouring source crystal. Moreover, it was completely natural. There was not the slightest gap in between. It was clearly a hole. That was why it was said to be a giant egg. After all, most devouring source crystals were the size of a pigeon's egg. It was difficult for this kind of mysterious crystal to continue accumulating to a larger size after reaching the size of a pigeon's egg. The reason why this giant crystal egg was so huge was naturally because it had devoured all the energy, light, and heat in the entire Death Star vortex. The devouring marrow essence was only the size of a nascent soul's fist. It was planted in the core of a star by Xianxia. Since then, it had triggered a great change that lasted thousands of years. An entire Death Star vortex had become a sacrifice. Countless stars had perished. The price of death had created this giant devouring marrow essence, as well as a large number of rare crystals and devouring source crystals that were subsidiary products in the Death Star vortex. In addition to this giant devouring marrow essence, there were also a large number of rare minerals and devouring source crystals in the Death Star vortex. The energy, light, and heat of the entire Death Star vortex had all been absorbed into the Death Star vortex. Coupled with the power of the devouring marrow essence, it was not surprising that so many rare crystals were produced in the Death Star vortex. If not for this, the previous eruption would not have happened. Now, the dozen or so holes in the Death Star vortex had healed on their own. The eruption of the Death Star vortex had stopped, but the large number of crystals in the Death Star vortex still remained. The moment Yi Xian's Dongshu shuttle entered, it immediately unleashed its maximum speed and absorbed the crystals with all its might. The large number of crystals were like a surging torrent, like rivers flowing into the sea, as they were absorbed by the Dongshu shuttle. Although the interior of the Dongshu shuttle used the space-folding technique, it was still unable to withstand the influx of so many rare crystals. The only reason it did not explode was because Yi Xian was also absorbing them with all his might. All the rare minerals and crystals that entered the Dongshu shuttle were all absorbed into the undying world within his body. During this process, an equal amount of rare minerals and crystals entered the Dongshu shuttle, which were then absorbed by Yi Xian. This cycle repeated endlessly. In less than a minute, 60 to 70% of the rare minerals and devourer source crystals that were suspended in the void of the Death Star vortex had been absorbed by him. Immediately after, the 15 battleships of the major forces that had followed the Dongshu shuttle into the Death Star vortex finally regained their senses. Like madmen, they began to plunder all the rare minerals and devourer source crystals in the void of the Death Star vortex, just like Yi Xian's Dongshu shuttle. Another 2 minutes passed, and the remaining 40% of the resources were divided among all the battleships. Among them, nearly 10% fell into Yi Xian's pocket. Up to this point, from the moment they entered the Death Star vortex until now, 70% of all the subsidiary resources in the Death Star vortex had been taken by Yi Xian alone, while the 15 battleships of the other forces only received about 30%. Chapter 3170. Merciless deprivation. Although the Dongshu shuttle was fast, it was not fully activated at this moment. Yi Xian was still busy collecting all kinds of rare minerals and devouring origin crystals that filled the cabins of the spaceship. As for the other 15 spaceships, due to their slower reaction speed, they had only collected about 30% of the rare minerals and devouring origin crystals in the Death Star vortex. Although the Death Star vortex was vast, the rare minerals and devouring origin crystals inside it were not as full as the sea. Therefore, although the 30% was more than the total amount that had erupted outside, it was actually not a lot. At the very least, when divided among the 15 spaceships, it was not enough to fill the cabins of the spaceships. Therefore, the Starry Sky experts in the 3 Starry Sky fortresses did not have to be busy collecting the rare minerals and devouring origin crystals in the cabins of the spaceships into their storage spaces or magical treasures because their cabins were full like Yi Xian. After collecting all the rare minerals and devouring origin crystals in the Death Star vortex, they immediately focused on the giant egg in the depths of the Death Star vortex in the distance. The 15 spaceships of various sizes all rushed forward at their maximum speed. In less than 10 seconds, the 15 spaceships of various sizes all overtook the Dongshu shuttle and rushed forward. The fastest 3 Starry Sky fortresses were now less than 100 kilometers away from the giant crystal egg. 100 kilometers might be a decent distance on land, especially for ordinary creatures, but in the void of the Milky Way, it was really nothing. Especially in this environment that was like a black hole, the sense of distance was really weakened too much. For the Starry Sky fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters, it was even more negligible. It could be said that the 3 Starry Sky fortresses were completely in front of the giant crystal egg and were almost touching it. It was also at this moment that an unexpected change occurred. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion suddenly sounded. The giant crystal egg, which was about 100 meters in size, suddenly exploded at this moment without any warning. The oval-shaped egg instantly cracked into countless small pieces. The entire egg was formed from the devouring source crystal. It was originally a devouring marrow essence that had devoured the void energy of the entire Death Star field, as well as the light and heat of all the stars. It had taken thousands of years for it to grow to this day and become this huge egg. Now that it had exploded, it was clear that the being nurtured in the giant egg had matured. All the essence of the devouring marrow essence had been gathered into the being nurtured in the giant egg. What had exploded was just an ordinary devouring origin crystal. Although the devourer source crystal was also a precious treasure, it was an important strategic resource for all the forces in the 3 universes. Its specific use to these forces was still unknown, but it could be seen from the fact that they were so eager to send large fleets to the Death Star field. At this moment, after the giant egg exploded, everyone ignored the devouring source crystal that was flying in all directions. On one hand, it was because they had already collected a lot of devouring source crystals, but more importantly, what they were truly concerned about was the being nurtured in the giant crystal egg. To be able to be nurtured in such a huge devouring source crystal, and even the formation of the entire Death Star field, and the entire Death Star field, at such a huge cost and shocking expense, what kind of being was being nurtured in the giant egg? The moment they saw the giant crystal egg, everyone had been blinded by the huge greed in their hearts and did not realize that it could actually be extremely dangerous. At this moment, when the giant crystal egg suddenly exploded, everyone's attention was drawn to everything inside the giant egg, and they did not have time to pay attention to anything else. Therefore, when the crystal body emitted a dazzling light, as if a perfect human body sculpted from the devouring source crystal was revealed, everyone, including Yi Xian who was far behind, opened their mouths wide, as if they had been struck by lightning. For a short period of time, they did not have any other reaction, and their minds were in chaos. At this moment, a terrible crisis descended. An extremely powerful suction force suddenly appeared from the crystal body that had appeared in the giant egg. Although it was invisible, it was more powerful than the suction force of an ordinary black hole. In an instant, the 3 starry sky fortresses closest to him with a diameter of 100,000 meters were sucked in and stopped in their tracks. However, this was only the beginning. This mysterious crystal body was like a terrifying beast that had just been born. As soon as it hatched from the giant crystal egg, its first thought was to eat. As an existence born from the devouring marrow essence, although the strand of Xianxia's self-destructing remnant soul that had entered his body had yet to gain control of the entire body, just the attribute instinct of this crystalline body had already determined that there could only be one way for it to eat. And that was to devour. It was just like how the devouring marrow essence had absorbed the energy of the void and the light and heat of countless stars in the process of nurturing him. It had even turned an entire vast star region into a land of death as it devoured everything. Domineering. Violent. The merciless plundering of red fruits. Boom. Boom. Without any suspense, the 3 starry sky fortresses closest to the crystal body exploded in an instant. All the starry sky experts and resources in the fortresses were exposed to the dark void inside the Death Star vortex. In an instant, they withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Including the various resources in the fortresses, including all the starry sky experts who had been caught off guard and were now in a panic. Immediately after, the other 12 smaller fortresses and 10,000 meters large fortresses behind the 3 starry sky fortresses also followed in the same footsteps without any suspense. A series of loud explosions rang out. Strangely, although such huge fortresses and starry sky fortresses had completely disintegrated and exploded, none of them showed the flames that should have been there. It was as if they had all been forcibly pulled apart by an invisible and strange force, causing them to disintegrate in an instant. At the same time, all the resources and starry sky experts in the 12 smaller fortresses that had exploded, just like the 3 fortresses that had been destroyed half a second ago. All the resources and starry sky experts quickly withered and withered. The extracted energy turned into an invisible storm and poured into the crystal body that still had its eyes closed and seemed to have no consciousness at all. It seemed to be devouring everything. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. A sense of crisis that he had never felt before suddenly descended upon him and completely enveloped his entire body and mind. Chapter 3171. Translator, Audiobook Studio Editor. Audiobook Studio Descend of the ladle sovereign Yi Xian's entire body sank to the bottom of the valley with the arrival of danger. The crystalline body in the depths of the Death Star vortex was simply too bizarre. The formless suction force emanating from it was so terrifying that even a fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters was torn apart by it. On the other hand, the reason why Yi Xian's Dongshu shuttle was still alive and didn't suffer the same calamity was because it was the furthest away and was left behind by the 15 fortresses and strongholds. The terrifying devouring force emitted by the crystal body had already been weakened by a lot by the time it reached this side. On the other hand, it was because the Void Hole shuttle was, after all, an epic-grade battleship. It had been fused with by Yi Xian 6 times, and it had even used up a wormhole ship that was made from special materials to be able to jump through wormholes in the universe. In terms of attack power, it might not be comparable to the terrifying Starry Sky Fortress, but in terms of strength, it was definitely comparable. Even so, the Dongshu shuttle was still trembling violently and looked like it could completely disintegrate at any time. Since you've damaged this prince's treasure ship, this matter is not over. Yi Xian gritted his teeth and took a step forward without hesitation. At the same time, he waved his hand and stored the Dongshu shuttle into his undying world. This battleship was the crystallization of his blood, sweat, and tears. Some of the similar battleships fused with it were even obtained by chance. Even the current Yi Xian might not be able to reforge a new battleship, so he didn't dare to take the risk. Although stepping out of the Dongshu shuttle was equivalent to exposing himself to the terrifying suction force, Yi Xian was certain that with the headless infant corpse around, it wouldn't sit idly by and watch him die. However, the same couldn't be said for the Dongshu shuttle. What surprised him was that after he stepped out of the Dongshu shuttle and stored it into his undying world, his body was exposed to the inner void of the Death Star vortex without any protection. However, Yi Xian didn't feel the slightest bit of suction force. It was as if the formless suction force was only effective against battleships. But this was obviously impossible. The Starry Sky powerhouses who fell out of the 15 fortresses and fortresses in the void ahead were clearly rapidly withering. Some of the weaker existences had already become withered corpses at this moment. Floating in the void, all signs of life were gone. But Yi Xian was completely unscathed, making him an exception. He was baffled and stunned for a moment. In the next moment, Yi Xian suddenly felt a slight tremor in his sea of consciousness. A ray of light whizzed out from between his eyebrows. As it floated above his head, an invisible and mysterious aura poured out from it. This was also a type of power. Although Yi Xian couldn't understand it, he could feel it. This was because this mysterious aura had long since become extremely dense in his sea of consciousness. That was the result of the accumulation of the void essence crystals over time. But at this moment, the void essence crystal floating above his head was unusually generous. The mysterious aura pouring out from within the crystal was like a gushing spring, transforming into a formless waterfall that enveloped Yi Xian and protected him completely. At this moment, Yi Xian finally understood why he didn't feel the terrifying suction force from the crystal body. That force had been blocked by the mysterious aura of the void essence crystal. The void essence crystal was formed when an entire universe plane expanded to its limit and headed towards destruction, turning into a universe black hole. Then it condensed to its limit. When it condensed to its limit, a big explosion would occur. At that time it would expand again, and this cycle would repeat, just like the reincarnation of life. The void essence crystal was the essence core of the void essence crystal that Yi Xian had obtained. To it, all forces related to the laws of the universe's void should be able to ignore them. The void essence crystal itself was the embodiment of the extreme condensation of a universe plane. Even the devouring system couldn't detect the mysterious aura emitted from the void essence crystal. Even if it came into contact with it, it still couldn't analyze its attributes, power, and other characteristics. Just this alone was enough to show how high-end the void essence crystal was. Naturally, it could block the suction force from the crystal body. After all, the crystal body was formed by plundering the void power of an entire star field. This kind of power couldn't affect the void essence crystal, and even the subsidiary product of the formation of the void essence crystal, the void soldier ladle. Whoosh! Screech! Almost in the next second, a black ray of light suddenly shot out from the void essence crystal floating above Yi Xian's head. It expanded in the wind, and at the same time, it let out a screech. An extremely powerful and terrifying aura instantly became fierce, affecting a part of the void. With a trembling sound, it rushed towards the crystal body in front of it. It was the venerable void ladle that Yi Xian had captured and taken away by the void essence crystal when he was challenging the void inheritance tower. Previously, in the void inheritance tower, this void ladle was only in its energy form. Its body was extremely huge, about 50,000 feet long, which was equivalent to 15,000 meters, which was much larger than a star fortress with a diameter of 10,000 meters. There were 9 golden horns on its back. Together with the bigger one on its head, there were 10 golden horns in total, 1 big and 9 small. Now its body was much smaller. It was only about 10,000 meters long, which was 3,000 meters long. However, it was no longer in the form of energy, but a real body. Obviously, this was the result of swallowing the essence crystal and absorbing it into his body. Then, he used his own strength to condense this body. If a flesh and blood body could be reconstructed, then this kind of crystalline existence was between a living and non-living body. Condensing a solid body wasn't difficult at all. Although it had shrunk, it should be able to continue growing. However, its power was obviously weakened by too much. When they were in the Void Inheritance Tower, the venerable Void Ladle was 15,000 meters long. Although it was not the supreme desolation, it should be in existence of that level. However, after condensing a real body, the pressure emitted by the venerable Void Ladle was obviously much weaker. It gave Yi Xian the feeling that it was only slightly stronger than Long Ziwen and Huai Dongzi. It should be between the 14th level, Cosmic Light, and the 15th level, Chenkuan. Although it was weaker, it was not like the Desolation demonic dragon that was taken away by the headless infant corpse because it was still in the form of energy. Every time it arrived, it would consume a lot of energy. One day, it would completely dissipate due to the exhaustion of its energy. In just 10 seconds, the venerable Void Ladle had crossed the endless void. Its speed was even more terrifying than that of a starry sky fortress with a diameter of 10,000 meters. When Yi Xian realized what was going on, it had already arrived in front of the crystal body. It was only 1,000 miles away. In front of them, a large number of withered corpses floated in the air. Some of them were still struggling on the brink of death. This was especially so for the 2 leaders of the Second Universe Federation who were in charge of the 3 interstellar fortresses, as well as the core member of the Tianji race. These three were all existences of the cosmic light realm. Although they could not resist the energy in their bodies being sucked away by the invisible suction force, they were not affected too much in the short term. At this moment, they were rushing toward the crystal body, trying to kill it. Chapter 3172. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The passage of time, half-step universe realm? That's impossible. A void-swallowing beast? And it has a golden horn. This is clearly a void-swallowing beast venerable. How can there be such an existence in the third universe? Long Xian. It must be him. What secrets does this guy have? How can he abduct a half-step universe realm void-swallowing beast venerable from the first universe of the Heavenly Legacy clan? When they turned around, they saw the figure of Senior Void Ladle in the air. The three top powerhouses who were pouncing toward the crystal body exclaimed in shock. The auras emanating from the bodies of these three existences were all at the cosmic light realm. Of the two giants from the Federation of the Second Universe, one of them was a master from the G-clan. He had a human-like body and a pair of giant G-clan wings on his back. Silver light flowed out of them, and they were extremely dazzling. It faintly emitted a cold metallic texture. The other one was extremely tall and looked like a giant. He was about 30 meters tall and looked like a human bear. However, he had no hair on his body. His skin was wrinkled like the bark of a 100-year-old tree. It was extremely dry and looked like a giant bark monster. As for the core leader of the Heavenly Legacy clan, his real body couldn't be seen at all. His entire body was covered by a purple combat suit. Combat suits were very common in the third universe of the human race's technology camp. If a battleship was said to be a means of transportation and a weapon for long-range attacks, then a battle mech would be a well-deserved melee heavy mech. A good combat suit could not only merge with the controller's armor, but also greatly increase the controller's defense and attack index. It could even reach a level higher than the controller's. However, in the human race's technological camp, due to the cultivation camp's refining technology, the majority of the human race's experts preferred lightweight battle armor. Therefore, although the human race also had battle armor, they were not very enthusiastic about this aspect of research. The battle armor that they produced was far inferior to that of the Tianji clan's battle armor. The cultivation base of this Tianji clan member, who had appeared in a combat mecha, was only around the middle stage of the cosmic light realm after merging with the mecha. However, this combat mecha was actually able to resist the invisible devouring power of the crystal body without being damaged in the slightest. This was enough to show its grade. It should be the kind of top-quality combat suit that could allow the controller to exert the combat power of a level higher than the controllers. If that was the case, then the master of the Heavenly Legacy clan in the combat suit should be in the 13th level of the Genesis realm. He hadn't entered the cosmic light realm yet. Screech! Just as these three giants, who all had the battle prowess of the cosmic light realm, exclaimed in shock, the Void Ladle, who had already arrived in front of them, roared again. Its huge body, which was thousands of feet long, was like a black mountain. Without any hesitation, it directly pressed down with a rumble. Its target wasn't the crystalline body, but the three cosmic light realm masters, including the silver-winged Ji-Ren. Damn it! What does it want? You dare attack us? Can't you see the situation clearly? Whoosh 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 whoosh. This scene made the three cosmic light powerhouses roar in anger. At the same time, they stopped and turned around to attack Void-revered Ladle, forming a joint attack with great tacit understanding. Half-step universe realm experts were existences that had already surpassed the perfection stage of the 9th rank of the cosmic realm, and they'd stepped foot into the 15th rank step by step, causing them to be far from being able to go against them. Countless black vines instantly sprang out of the old demon's body. Each of them was a meter in diameter. Not only were they all as agile as snakes, but they also circled in the void as soon as they rushed out. They were like silk being peeled from a cocoon. They were endless. In the blink of an eye, they interweaved into a giant hammer that was 1,000 feet long in the void above his head. Like a meteor, it rapidly smashed toward the falling Lord Ladle in the void. At the same time, the wings on the back of the silver-winged Ji-Ren flapped slightly, and his figure disappeared in an instant. The laws of the void in this Death Star vortex were already in chaos, making it impossible to teleport. Even warships could not perform space jumps. At this moment, his figure had disappeared in the blink of an eye, a sign that his speed had reached the limit. When he reappeared, he was already on top of Lord Ladle's back. The silver wings on his back flapped, and silver light flowed and swooshed, splitting the void. Like two unparalleled sharp blades, they slashed toward Lord Ladle at the same time. As for the purple mecha that housed the Tianji clan's upper echelon, at this moment, with a hum, a layer of dark purple energy shield instantly appeared on the surface of the 10 zhong tall mecha. At the same time, the mecha's figure also rushed into the sky, punching out with a simple fist, but at this moment, its massive right fist was completely enveloped by a black sphere of about 1 meter in size. It was clearly antimatter energy. This punch was like a mini death ray cannon. It was indestructible. All matter and energy would be melted away under the impact of the antimatter death ray. Even the Void Soldier Ladle clan, who was known to have the strongest crystal body, could not resist it. This punch could at least blow a hole in Lord Ladle's body. Boom! Old Monster Bark's giant vine fist slammed into Void Lord Ladle's abdomen with a deafening roar, but it unexpectedly exploded. The only effect it had was to slightly slow down Lord Ladle's falling momentum. However, Old Monster Bark opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of green liquid. This was the backlash from the destruction of a large number of vines. A single punch had caused him to suffer internal injuries. At this moment, a black light flashed beside him. The crystal body that had just opened its eyes suddenly appeared in front of Old Monster Bark in the blink of an eye. It raised its hand and directly stabbed into the back of Old Monster Bark's head, as if it was absorbing and devouring. Old Monster Bark's huge body withered visibly. In less than a breath, he had become dispirited. Not good. This crystal monster has awakened. Screech! On the ladle's back, Silverwing Ji Ren's expression changed as he cried out in alarm. Before he finished speaking, Lord Ladle, who had risen up again, had already made his move. The 9 golden edges on the ladle's back sprang up at the same time and intertwined and danced in the void at an extremely fast speed. The entire void was instantly filled with cracks. It was like a piece of tofu that was being cut by 9 sharp blades at a high frequency. It was completely chaotic. This kind of secret space technique was extremely strange. Silverwing Ji Ren's body was instantly filled with countless space cracks, and the chaotic aura of space turbulence emitted from them made his expression change. His body came to an abrupt halt, and he did not dare to move an inch. Otherwise, once he was sucked in, it would be difficult for him to return. In the blink of an eye, Venerated Void Ladle and the crystal body had each taken care of a cosmic realm elite. Only the high-ranking member of the Tianji clan who was piloting the mecha remained unscathed. However, his punch was destined to not be able to land on Venerated Void Ladle's body. Venerated Void Ladle had already targeted the antimatter death ray energy ball the moment it appeared on the mecha's right fist. Hum! A violent buzzing sound rang out in the void. The giant golden horn on Lord Ladle's head suddenly trembled at a high frequency. This seemed to be a secret space technique that involved the law of the void. It should belong to the bloodline ability of the Ladle Voiders. It actually changed its position in an instant. Chapter 3173. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation hitting a cow through a mountain, space law divine ability? How is this possible? He's only a half-step Qianquan realm. Inside the purple mecha, the Tianji clan's higher-ups exclaimed in shock. The entire mech turned around inexplicably. Its original form rose up and extended its arms to punch above its head. Strangely, its body flew horizontally, and its fist smashed towards the crystal body on the other side. This scene was too strange, and the key was that there were no traces to follow. As the person involved, he didn't even know how this change happened. He didn't feel the slightest bit. Other than the space law level divine ability, there was no other explanation. As for the power of the laws of the universe, it was clearly a domain that only the mighty figures of the 15th realm, the universe realm, had the qualifications to slightly touch upon. In fact, most of the mighty figures of the universe realm might not really touch upon the power of the laws of the universe. This required insight and opportunity. Venerated Void Ladle was only a half-step Qianquan realm powerhouse. It was impossible for him to use the divine ability of the universe's laws. He did not know that Venerated Void Ladle's original body in the Eldritch era was a terrifying existence that was second only to the Primordial Supreme. Although the Tower of Antiquity had only left behind 30% of the bloodline inheritance of those terrifying beings from the Eldritch era. Even so, with the level of Venerated Void Ladle's original body, even 30% of the inheritance was enough for him to touch the power of the universe's laws. Boom! Before the purple mecha's death ray fist landed, a loud explosion came from the space above Venerated Void Ladle's back. The void, which had been torn apart by the 9 golden edges on the back of the ladle and was full of cracks, finally collapsed completely. The large area, about a few miles in size, instantly turned into a small black hole. Before the silver-winged G people in this area could react, their bodies had been swallowed and they were sucked into the void turbulence inside the black hole. Even if they did not die, it was like eternal exile. In any case, they would never come back. At the same time, Yi Xian, who was rushing at full speed from behind, finally arrived. He shouted at venerated Void Ladle who was falling down. "Are you a violent maniac? What other tricks can you use other than pressure? That crystal body is still useful. Besides, the purple mecha is also mine. The guy inside doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. Just don't break the mecha." Venerated Void Ladle obviously did not understand these words, but its crystal body was refined from the void marrow crystal. At this moment, the crystal was like a signal relay station. Yi Xian's words were immediately transmitted through the marrow crystal and received by venerated void marrow crystal. Its body came to an abrupt halt as it hovered in mid-air like a giant mountain, right above the purple mecha and the crystalline body. In the next moment, the high-frequency vibration of the giant golden horn on top of the Void Ladle Senior's head suddenly changed, and the rapid buzzing sound in the void instantly became heavy and solid like the beating of a drum. This must be another weapon ladle bloodline ability that touched upon the power of the universe's space law. If the previous ability was called stellar transposition, then the weapon ladle that venerated Void Ladle used now could be called hitting a bull through a mountain. This was because the purple mecha, which had just stabilized itself under the effect of the stellar transposition, suddenly shuddered and then became completely still. The antimatter death ray ball on its right fist also disappeared, and its 10 feet tall figure was suspended in the void like a statue. If there were no accidents, the Tianji clan's higher-ups in the mecha had already fallen the moment the purple mecha trembled. They were killed on the spot, but the mecha was undamaged. This was also the power of the universe's space law. Venerated Void Ladle was originally a half-step universe realm expert, and it used its bloodline ability to borrow the power of the void to form a powerful shockwave attack. The Tianji clan's higher-ups in the mecha were only at the Genesis realm. They were almost 2 realms weaker than the purple mecha, so it was natural that they would die in one hit. In fact, Yi Xian had already seen this kind of attack before. It was in the black hole of the first universe. At that time, the Void Ladle Sovereign, whose body was as large as a mountain, was at least 1,000 miles away from Yi Xian and Ba Chai. Suddenly, the Void Ladle Sovereign, whose body was as large as a mountain, let out a shrill cry without warning. Its power was so terrifying that the huge black hole of the void was shaken. In an instant, the sound of rolling thunder resounded, covering the sky and earth as it swept over. Using the sound as a guide, it instantly drew upon the power of the void in the huge black hole area, turning it into a cage that crushed from all directions. This kind of void cage could only be considered a secret technique. It was not a divine ability, and it did not touch upon the true universe's space law. However, it was also an inheritance of the weapon ladle race's bloodline. Although the void weapon ladles were not living beings, and even if they were, the nest of weapon ladles in the black hole of life had nothing to do with that one from the primordial era. The weapon ladles were a subsidiary product of the formation of the void marrow mother. The weapon ladles born from different void marrow mothers were not related to each other. However, the essence of the void marrow mother was the same. Although their levels might be different, they were the reincarnation products of the extreme contraction and expansion of different universe planes. The magnitude of their power depended on the scale of the universe plane. Their formation embodied the essence of the universe's space law. Therefore, whether they were from the same nest or not, when they grew to a certain height, they would be able to comprehend some of the universe's space law. Like the bloodline inheritance of living beings, it would never be broken. Yi Xian had already vaguely guessed this. Therefore, when he saw that the high-ranking member of the Tianji clan being shocked to death by this seemingly familiar divine ability, he was stunned for a moment before he quickly understood. F***CK. With a raise of his hand, the stars move, and with a flip of his hand, he can hit a cow through a mountain. In the blink of an eye, 2 divine abilities related to the power of the void have appeared. TSK. Amazing. As he muttered to himself, Yi Xian couldn't help but show a hint of envy on his face. Anyone who saw these 2 divine abilities would be jealous. Although he couldn't communicate with the weapon ladles directly, and the void marrow crystal, as a transfer station, didn't pay much attention to him, Yi Xian didn't intend to give up. At this time, he was already thinking about it, and he would think of a way later. After throwing away this thought, Xian immediately turned his head to look at the crystal body standing in the void not far away. The crystal body had just absorbed all the vitality and power of a cosmic light realm master, and now it had closed its eyes again, as if it was digesting it silently. However, this digesting process was obviously very fast. Just as Xian turned his head to look, the crystal body that had closed its eyes for a few seconds had opened them again. This time, the confusion in its eyes had disappeared by more than half, replaced by a strong sense of resentment and killing intent. Chapter 3174. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation IAM. Big tongue. Before the other party could finish speaking, Xian heard the familiar sound of a system notification in his mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host. Innate treasure body discovered. Attribute: innate energy crystal form. Grade: perfect pure grade. Grade: innate defective grade. Status: consciousness has taken over the body. Compatibility is insufficient. Fusion is incomplete. Ding! Congratulations to the host. The activation conditions for the doppelganger system have been met. Do you wish to activate it now? Ding! Congratulations to the host. If you choose to activate the doppelganger system with 3 subsidiary systems, the host system will reward you with a one-time success rate of 100%. Ding! Congratulations to the host. One after another, the system notifications rang in his mind. Xian was stunned. He didn't pay much attention to the rest of the notifications. Fortunately, it didn't matter. He just had to check with the system later. At this moment, his entire body was enveloped by a huge surprise. He even felt like it was raining pies from the sky. Doppelganger system? Just the sound of it sounds awesome. Xian had activated the fusion system and his personal star communication system twice before. Now that he had activated the doppelganger system, he had 3 subsidiary systems of the main doppelganger system. And all of them were extremely practical, especially important to Xian. His luck was off the charts. The so-called doppelganger system was obviously a system ability that allowed Xian to have a doppelganger system. Although Xian had come into contact with a lot of doppelganger cultivation techniques before entering the starry sky, everything was reset after entering the starry sky. He couldn't use them now. Moreover, those cultivation techniques and doppelganger cultivation techniques were obviously of a lower level and might not be suitable for him to cultivate now. In the starry sky, all the laws were different. Previously it was a small world. Now, Xian was in the endless starry sky. The level of the laws was at or near the peak. Therefore, he had never thought of cultivating a doppelganger before. He hadn't come across a suitable starry sky doppelganger cultivation technique, so it was a waste of time to think about it. But he never expected that he would be so lucky today and encounter a clone in the form of an innate energy crystal. He didn't even need to cultivate painstakingly anymore. According to the system, it seemed that as long as he placed a strand of his primordial spirit into it, he would be able to successfully possess an external incarnation. This was an innate treasure body that had been formed at the cost of the destruction of an entire vast star field. It was unknown how much energy had been consumed before the giant devouring source crystal egg had matured. If there was no accident, this should be the work of the palace master of the 6th absolute palace. Xian had already guessed this when he heard the conversation between the wretched mosquito butcher and Xianxia. Right now, the wisp of Xianxia's primordial spirit that had escaped after exploding and rushed into the Death Star vortex should have already entered this innate treasure body. This was what the system meant when it said that the consciousness had entered the body. However, although Xianxia's yuan spirit had already entered, due to the lack of compatibility, he had not completely fused with it. In other words, this innate treasure body was not his yet. If others wanted to snatch it, there was still a chance of success. This was especially true for Xian. After activating 3 subsidiary systems, the main devouring system had actually rewarded him with a 100% success rate of forcible devouring. This was simply helping him cheat. With this reward, Xian could directly forcibly devour the other party and pull them into the devouring space in his body, which was today's undying world. At that time, with the help of the devouring system and the headless infant corpse, there was no need to be afraid that they would not be able to kill the wisp of Xianxia's primordial spirit. If he wanted Xian to do this, he really didn't have the ability. However, this biggest problem had already been solved before he had the time to worry about it. What was there to hesitate about in this situation? With this in mind, Yi Xian immediately ordered the devouring system to immediately activate the subsidiary doppelganger system. At the same time, he proposed to receive the opportunity to forcibly devour as a reward. As for the target, it was naturally the innate treasure body that had not yet finished speaking. As soon as he replied, the result of the system notification rang in Yi Xian's mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host. The doppelganger system has been successfully activated. Current level. Level 1. Number of doppelgangers available at the current level. 1. Ding! Congratulations to the host. 3 subsidiary systems have been successfully activated. System reward, 1 forcible devour with a 100% success rate. Confirmed to be used immediately. Target confirmed. Adjusting the system's energy. Progress 1. He actually wanted to adjust the system's energy? It seemed that the 100% success rate of forcible devouring was not given for free. Wasn't the system's energy the same as Yi Xian's resources? The devouring system had already fused with him. All the energy required to maintain the system's operation was provided by Yi Xian. Wool comes from a sheep's back. All the resources obtained in the undying world could be used by the system at any time. Yi Xian did not care about it. This time, he was going to have to bleed a lot. Fortunately, the harvest was huge, so it was acceptable. At this moment, the innate treasure body standing in the void opposite him finished speaking. However, in the end, he stuttered for a long time. He was so anxious that his neck seemed to have become thicker. However, he could not squeeze out the rest of his words. Seeing this, Yi Xian was instantly delighted. This was the side effect of an incomplete fusion. He could not even straighten his tongue. Haste makes waste. In such a good mood, Yi Xian's evil sense of humor suddenly appeared. He grinned and laughed at the innate treasure body opposite him. He continued the other party's words. I am Big Tongue. I am 7 kills deity. Xianxia's avatar, who had already taken control of his innate treasure body, had almost exploded from anger. As he roared, his tongue actually became even more uncontrollable. His body swayed twice, and he almost fell into the void. In the next moment, the system notification sounded in Yi Xian's mind again. Ding! Energy adjustment complete. Target locked. Forcible devouring activated. Whoosh! A faintly discernible sound of something breaking through the air rang out. The innate treasure body in front of him, which was still in a rage, disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was forcefully devoured by the system and pulled into the undying world within Yi Xian's body. Yi Xian still couldn't understand this method, but there was a reason for everything. He believed that one day, he would be able to fully comprehend everything. Of course, that would only be possible when Yi Xian grew up in the starry sky environment and reached a very high level. Now, as the innate treasure body was successfully devoured by the system, Yi Xian's heart suddenly relaxed. A thought flashed through his mind and his face immediately froze. Big Tongue? It couldn't be so coincidental, right? If he remembered correctly, the system's first few notifications seemed to have said that this innate treasure body's grade was perfect and pure. If that was the case, what the hell was the evaluation of its grade being innately defective? It was already perfect and pure, but innately defective? This was illogical. Could it be that this innate treasure body that walked out of the giant egg that devoured origin crystals had not fully matured? Could it be that the primordial spirit of Xianxia's primordial spirit had self-destructed because the Death Star vortex had been discovered? Could it be that it had no choice but to mature prematurely and enter the innate treasure body? Chapter 3175. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation sent to the Inheritance Tower. Though he had obtained the innate treasure body, there was still a wisp of Xianxia's primordial spirit in it. He had to get it out first before Yi Xian could proceed with his first outer body incarnation. He did not intend to intervene in this matter, so he directly gave instructions to the devouring system. At the same time, he tried to communicate with the corpse lamp tattoo on his left chest, but there was still no response, so he could only give up. Fortunately, after receiving Yi Xian's instructions, the system did not send a warning tone. It must be dealing with this matter and should be able to succeed. Yi Xian was relieved. Taking advantage of this time, he could clean up the mess in front of him. Thinking of this, Yi Xian turned his head and scanned the surrounding void. The entire space within the vast vortex of stars was now deathly silent. Not only was the innate treasure body gone, one of the three fellows with cosmic light realm battle prowess had been banished into the turbulent streams of space, one had been turned into a withered corpse, and the last high-ranking member of the Tianji clan had been struck with a stick, directly falling into the enormous purple mecha. The 15 fortresses that had rushed into the Death Star vortex were all disintegrated. The resources and the energy contained in some of the treasures were all sucked away. The starry sky masters who fell out of the fortresses, without exception, were all withered corpses. Even the fragments of the giant egg that had exploded and the devouring source crystals that had fallen from the 15 fortresses and strongholds had all disappeared. This kind of highly pure energy, after being absorbed, was gone without a trace, leaving nothing behind. The devouring power before was too terrifying. It was probably not used in a normal state, just like the first cry of a newborn baby, which was always louder. After Yi Xian took over the innate treasure body, he might not be so powerful when he used this kind of talent. At this moment, as far as the eye could see, there were ruins of fortresses and floating corpses everywhere. It was a shocking sight. It was a mess. At this time, Senior Void Ladle had returned and once again drilled into the Void Marrow crystal. As for the latter, it immediately turned into a ray of light and flashed through the top of Yi Xian's head and entered his sea of consciousness. As expected of the innate treasure body that was nurtured from the origin of devouring. Its appetite is really big. This kind of devouring power should be some kind of divine ability that originated from the same source as the treasure body. It will be mine soon. As he muttered to himself, Yi Xian grew excited once more. He turned to look at the purple mecha hovering silently in the air. He was also very interested in this mecha. Even the 3 starry sky fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters had collapsed under the terrifying devouring power of the innate treasure body. Even the Dongshu shuttles, which were already epic-grade starry sky treasure ships, couldn't withstand it. However, after the high-level member of the Tianji clan fell out of the silver fortress and lay in this purple mecha, which was not far away from the innate treasure body, he was safe and sound. The mecha was not damaged at all, which showed its quality. Yi Xian didn't like mechas, but since it was a rare and good thing, he couldn't let it go easily. It would be good to keep it and play with it when he had nothing to do. Besides, if he could use it to fuse with his indestructible glass armor for the 6th time, there might be unexpected surprises. Of course, the mecha had not been appraised yet. Yi Xian was just thinking about it. He would do it later. Very quickly, after circling around the enormous mecha more than a dozen times, Yi Xian finally saw through some tricks. After tossing and turning for a while, he opened the entrance and pulled out the upper echelons of the Heavenly Fate clan, who were no longer breathing and had probably been damaged by the shock. He originally wanted to throw it away, but this guy was a middle-aged man with a rather hateful appearance and shifty eyes. Yi Xian was unhappy just looking at him. However, this was a high-level member of the Tianji clan after all. He was at least a Genesis realm cultivator. Moreover, he was a mecha, so he could still use it. However, it was hard to say whether he would still have the same consciousness after changing the innate treasure body. At the very least, he could still remove the parts and continue to use them. How could the body parts of a mecha at the 14th stage of the Genesis realm be ordinary? Thinking of this, Yi Xian immediately changed his mind. He threw the mecha into the undying world inside his body and lay down in an inconspicuous corner to kiss the earth. Then, he began to study the ownerless purple mecha in front of him. Although Yi Xian didn't know the name of the mecha, he didn't care. Who knows, he might just merge it with the indestructible glass armor later. After studying it for half a day, he still couldn't figure out how to operate it. Moreover, the devouring system was obviously busy dealing with Tian Chenzi's Yuan Shen inside the innate sky treasure. It didn't have the time to answer Yi Xian's questions, nor was it convenient for him to ask. Therefore, after a fruitless search, Yi Xian simply waved his hand and stored the mecha into his undying world. At this point, there was no need to stay in the Death Star vortex anymore. It was time to rush out and return to Planet Victorious Return. However, this Death Star vortex was like a black hole. It was easy to enter, but there was no way out. They could only find some void passage similar to a natural wormhole to escape. Just as Yi Xian was about to take out the Dongshu shuttle and look around to see if he could find the exit, the system's notifications sounded in his mind again. The surprise came too quickly. The Yuan Shen inside the innate sky treasure was finally forced out. However, the system couldn't erase it. After all, It was the Yuan Shen of a universe realm master. Throw it into the Tower of Desolation, directly to the 9th floor. After thinking for a while, Yi Xian immediately made a decision and issued a new order to the system. The Tower of Desolation recognized Yi Xian as its master and had been refined. Now, it was suspended in the air above Yi Xian's mind. Although the devouring system, including Yi Xian, couldn't use its power because it was sealed, it was still possible to throw things into it. The 9th floor was a big scene. There were supreme beings at the level of Desolation Supreme and the giant Eye of the Desolation Heavenly Way. Even a universe realm master would be like an ant if thrown in. Tian Chenzi didn't know what was good for him. He actually said that he wanted to take his head. Now, Yi Xian gave him a wisp of his Yuan Shen to show his attitude. It was a slap in the face. As a result, following Yi Xian's order, Tian Chenzi's primordial spirit within the innate heavenly treasure was immediately expelled. Immediately after, within the 9th floor of the ancient desolate inheritance tower, incomparably mournful screams suddenly sounded out. They actually resounded endlessly, and even the tone of their voices changed. Those who didn't know better would think that some little girl was being ravaged and howled endlessly. Unfortunately, Yi Xian couldn't hear it. At this moment, he was asking the devouring system about the doppelganger system. Since the innate sky treasure was settled, he wasn't in a hurry to leave. This place was quiet, and no one would bother to rush into the Death Star vortex. He could use this place to cultivate in seclusion and create his first outer body incarnation. Chapter 3176. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Planting a primordial spirit. After a series of inquiries, Yi Xian was dumbfounded. This doppelganger was not easy to make. Although the process was simple, the requirements were extremely special. It was definitely an unusual path. At least, Yi Xian had never thought that doppelgangers could be done in this way. Generally speaking, to cultivate a doppelganger, one had to split a strand of primordial spirit from one's own primordial spirit and let it enter the main doppelganger. It was equivalent to having one primordial spirit and 2 or more bodies. Of course, there would be a distinction between the primary and secondary parts. This was also why doppelgangers were generally weaker than the original body. The strand of primordial spirit that was split could not be too large, or else it would have a great impact on the original body. Although injuries to the primordial spirit could be healed, it would take a long time and was generally unacceptable. Previously, when Yi Xian left the Void Brand in the first universe's black hole, he had split a strand of weak primordial spirit. At that time, he had been tormented badly. The original body's primordial spirit, which had been damaged by that incident, had just healed and fully recovered not long ago. This time, in order to obtain a strong devouring doppelganger, Yi Xian had been prepared to split his primordial spirit again. This time, the primordial spirit that was split would definitely be much larger than before. However, at this moment, after understanding the details of the doppelganger system, Yi Xian immediately realized that he had taken things for granted. Splitting a primordial spirit was not necessary at all. However, Yi Xian was not happy at all, because the method provided by the doppelganger system was too time-consuming. To successfully condense this doppelganger, Yi Xian's primordial spirit and consciousness had to leave the original body and enter the innate treasure body. Then, according to the secret technique provided by the doppelganger system, it would slowly condense a primordial spirit seed in the innate treasure body, as if the primordial spirit was in seclusion. Then, basically, there was Noah then. After this step, more than half of the process was completed. Yi Xian's primordial spirit could leave the original body and do what it was supposed to do. As for the innate treasure body, it could only be stored away and let the primordial spirit seed in the sea of consciousness slowly grow. At last, it would break out of the shell and a perfect doppelganger would be successfully condensed. The doppelganger refining doppelganger's advantages were obvious. First, the primordial spirit seed in the doppelganger would not be damaged in the primordial doppelganger's primordial spirit seed. Was not like an ordinary doppelganger, which was difficult to grow. By the time it broke out of its shell and entered the main body, it had also grown into a complete primordial spirit. It was equivalent to making a copy of Yi Xian's primordial spirit instead of splitting it. The significance of this to the future growth of the avatar was simply immeasurable. According to the doppelganger system, doppelganger treasure of the treasure doppelganger treasure body. Of of course. If he really had to wait for 100 years before he could use this devouring avatar, it would be too late. At that time, Yi Xian's original body would have already grown to an unknown extent, and this avatar would most likely become useless. Wouldn't this be a waste of effort? In addition, after the original primordial spirit entered the innate treasure body, although there was no need to immediately condense the primordial spirit seed, the process would take an entire day. For the sake of the harvest in 100 years, Yi Xian was really unwilling to waste an entire day with the complicated matters at hand. He fell into hesitation on the spot. After a while, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something. His eyes lit up, and he raised his hand to slap his forehead. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. I actually went into a dead end and even forgot to be flexible. I'm really speechless. What he meant by being flexible was actually very simple. That was to change the concept. He still had to condense the primordial spirit seed, so he couldn't save a day. However, after this primordial spirit seed was successfully condensed, it might not necessarily stay in the body of the innate treasure body. The original body and the innate treasure body could be used interchangeably. It was like two energy laser swords with different powers, but both required energy crystals to be embedded in them in order to be activated. Although there were two energy crystals, one was full, and the other was empty and needed to be recharged. In that case, when the sword needed to be used, he just had to insert the full energy crystal into the groove, and the one that was not used would be filled with the empty energy crystal. Next time, when there was a different need, he could just dig out the energy crystal and switch it. Yi Xian's primordial spirit was the full energy crystal, and the primordial spirit seed needed to be recharged. Although it was a little troublesome to switch it back and forth, the key was that both sides would not be delayed, so it was worth the trouble. After making the decision, Yi Xian immediately summoned the innate treasure body's undying world. At this time, as Tian Chenzi's primordial spirit had been expelled, this innate treasure body had already closed its eyes, and did not have any qi. Yi Xian immediately sat down cross-legged, suspended in the void, and entered a state of cultivation. His primordial spirit quickly rushed out from the top of his head, and entered the body of the innate treasure body opposite him. Then, according to the method of condensing the primordial spirit seed that he had thoroughly understood from the doppelganger system, he started to condense it with all his might. Unknowingly, a day and night passed. Yi Xian's first primordial spirit seed was finally condensed successfully. What he had to do next was to send the primordial spirit seed into his original body to be nurtured, and then return to start the fusion between his primordial spirit and this innate treasure body. After completing this step, Yi Xian would be able to completely control the power of this innate treasure body. Not only would he be able to take his original body into his original body with a wave of his hand, but he would also be able to temporarily summon the few treasures in his original body's knowledge sea. As for his original body, it was currently at the 6th major realm, Nebula First Order, and needed to cultivate in seclusion. Leaving his original body inside the innate treasure body to be nurtured was equivalent to his original body cultivating in seclusion, and Yi Xian's primordial spirit would temporarily stay in the innate treasure body, using its terrifying devouring talent to rapidly improve the innate treasure body's cultivation realm. It was like killing two birds with one stone, without delay on either side. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Yi Xian suddenly realized something. It seemed that after entering this innate treasure body, he was so focused on condensing the primordial spirit seed that he actually forgot to check the current cultivation realm of this innate treasure body. It shouldn't be too low. After all, when it had just broken out of the giant source crystal egg, it had swallowed the energy of a full 15 fortresses and strongholds, including the cultivation realm and vitality of those starry sky masters, and even all the power in the body of a supreme cosmic realm existence. Even if there was some loss and damage during the essential conversion and refining process of absorbing and devouring, the cultivation realm of this innate treasure body would definitely not be so weak. Not to mention the cosmic realm, there should still be a chance for it to reach the origin or heavenly cave realm. With this expectation, Yi Xian immediately began to investigate, but the result was far beyond his expectations. The strength of this innate treasure body was only equivalent to the peak of the 9th order of the galaxy realm. It was still a small breakthrough away from the 8th major realm, the black hole realm. Chapter 3177. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Half-Step Black Hole. Previously, the innate treasure body's cultivation had greatly disappointed Yi Xian. It was actually still a small step away from breaking through to the 8th great realm, the black hole realm. It didn't seem like it had just devoured 15 fortresses and strongholds, as well as all the cultivation and vitality of a supreme expert of the cosmic light realm, causing Yi Xian to be greatly disappointed. However, That might be because the innate treasured body had been matured in advance. The innate incomplete grade indicated by the system should be referring to this. The reason why Yi Xian was still not at the black hole realm while devouring so crazily was probably because he was using it to repair his innate incomplete body. This comforted Yi Xian quite a bit. At least, the innate treasured body's big tongue was only temporary. After the treasured body was repaired, it would disappear. However, what he did not expect was that after his primordial spirit returned to his main body and threw the primordial spirit seed into his knowledge sea, his knowledge sea suddenly expanded. The cultivation of Yi Xian's main body actually shot up rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had broken through 2 small stages, but it still did not stop. Seeing all this, Yi Xian was dumbfounded. His mind went blank for a moment, and then he came to a realization. The sudden increase in cultivation this time was obviously due to the innate treasured body. First of all, the primordial spirit seed had consumed a huge amount of the treasured body's cultivation to successfully condense it. Now that it was thrown into Yi Xian's knowledge sea and had taken root there, some energy would more or less overflow and flow into the knowledge sea, causing Yi Xian's main body's cultivation to rise rapidly. In addition, Yi Xian's primordial spirit had entered the innate treasured body for the first time. Not only did he stay inside for a day and night, but he also focused on condensing the primordial spirit seed. During this process, his own primordial spirit had unknowingly undergone some changes due to the innate perfect attributes of the treasured body. Now that it had returned to his main body, it immediately led to a change in his main body's cultivation. Under the superposition of these 2 factors, Yi Xian's original body's cultivation rose from the first level of the nebula realm. In the end, it directly stabilized at the 7th level of the nebula realm, breaking through 6 small levels. Now, Yi Xian was already a powerful existence at the late stage of the nebula realm. However, compared to the innate treasure body that was about to break through to the black hole realm, there was still a gap. After the psyche ocean calmed down, Yi Xian's Yuan Shen once again rushed out of his body and entered the innate treasure body. What he needed to do now was to refine the Yuan Shen with all his might and improve the compatibility between the Yuan Shen and the innate treasure body to perfection. After completing this step, Yi Xian's first doppelganger could be considered to have been successfully condensed. Initially, he thought that this process would take at least 1 or 2 days, but it ended in less than half a day. Perhaps this was because Yi Xian had already cultivated a Yuan Shen seed in the innate heavenly treasure body. His original Yuan Shen had been subtly influenced by the innate perfection of the innate heavenly treasure body, greatly increasing his compatibility with it. Boom! Just as Yi Xian's primordial spirit completely merged with the innate treasure body, a deafening boom rang out from within Yi Xian's primordial spirit. Immediately after, he felt an incomparably vast and boundless cultivation power surging within his innate treasure body like a raging river. Is this the feeling of a half-step black hole? It's really a very powerful. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. The appearance of the innate treasure body could be changed according to his will, including his clothes and everything else. After all, this was a doppelganger formed from pure energy. Changing all these was just a small change in the form of energy. After pondering for a moment, Yi Xian's mind moved slightly, and the appearance of the innate treasure body immediately began to change. Although his original appearance was extremely valiant, he still felt that his original appearance was more pleasing to the eye. Soon, the appearance of the innate treasure body was completely changed. It was exactly the same as Yi Xian's original body. The original naked body was also covered with clothes transformed from energy. It was exactly the same as the original body that was sitting cross-legged in the void opposite with eyes closed like an old monk in meditation. With a wave of his hand, the original body was absorbed into Yi Xian's body. Then, he began to try to connect the original body's sea of consciousness with the devouring system. Now that the original body was in the doppelganger, although it had the terrifying devouring talent and its cultivation had reached the half-step black hole realm, at certain critical moments, the black hole realm was far from enough to deal with. However, the various treasures and magical powers in the original body's sea of consciousness often had miraculous effects. If he could use everything in the original body's sea of consciousness while the original body was in the doppelganger state, it would be perfect. However, that was obviously impossible. After Yi Xian tried, he discovered that the current him couldn't even connect to the original body's sea of consciousness. It was naturally impossible for him to use the treasures and abilities that the original body possessed. If he wanted to do this, he would have to wait until Yi Xian completely fused his avatar with his original body. He wouldn't be able to simply absorb his original body into his body like a magic treasure like he was now. In addition, when the spirit seed in Yi Xian's original body's sea of consciousness was completely mature, he should be able to achieve this through the connection between the doppelganger and original body's spirit. Fortunately, the devouring system was integrated with Yi Xian's original body's spirit. At this moment, the original body's cultivation and the key points and magical powers in the original body's sea of consciousness could not be used. But the devouring system was not limited by this. At a critical moment, Yi Xian could use the devouring system to summon everything in the original body's sea of consciousness, but it would take some time, but it was better than nothing. At this point, Yi Xian's first doppelganger was finally completely condensed, and he had one more trump card. After calming down, he immediately issued an order to the devouring system to immediately count the gains. He was anxious to know how many devouring source crystals he had obtained this time. This was a really rare resource, and Yi Xian had been searching for it for a long time, and today, he finally got what he wanted. The counting was soon over, and the system's prompt sounded in Yi Xian's mind as usual. This should be in effect at the level of the spirit. After all, the doppelganger did not have a real brain or internal organs, and it was a pure body of energy crystal. The final tally of the data made Yi Xian very excited. Even he was surprised by the huge harvest. When he first entered the Death Star vortex, he was so focused on collecting the crystal resources that the Dongshu shuttle had absorbed from the surrounding void that he did not count it carefully. In terms of the devouring source crystals, his harvest this time was 56,207. Including the one given by the system at the beginning, Yi Xian currently had a total of 56,208 devouring source crystals, which was enough for him to shop around in the exchange shop. In addition to the devouring source crystals, his harvest of various other rare minerals was even greater. After all, even in the inner void of the Death Star vortex, the ratio of devouring source crystals was only about 30%. There were hundreds of types of rare minerals, with the smallest having only a little over 100 pieces, and the largest having more than 100 pieces. In total, there were nearly 10 million pieces. Some of them were not only unknown to Yi Xian, but even the devouring system was still analyzing and identifying them. Obviously, they were all ordinary items that would be of great use in the future. Chapter 3178. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Interstellar Trailblazer, Ding. Congratulations, host. Unknown teleportation array discovered. Appraisal result. One use, one-way teleportation array. Teleportation destination. Unknown. Danger factor. Unknown. Do you wish to explore it immediately? Hint. If the exploration is successful, there is a certain chance of upgrading the system title. System current title. Level 3, Interstellar Explorer. System next title. Level 4, Interstellar Trailblazer. Interstellar Trailblazer. This title comes with a halo effect. On the basis of the previous 3 titles, Interstellar Trailblazer, Interstellar Adventurer, and Interstellar Explorer, it will add a beginner-level planar coordinate jump ability. Beginner-level planar coordinate jump. The system's ability to perform a coordinate jump between different universes, ignoring the barriers of the universes and directly jumping to the destination. The beginner level is limited to the adjacent universes connected by wormholes. Hint. The position that the planar coordinate jump ability can reach is limited to the wormhole coordinates that have been imprinted in advance. Activation condition. At least one coordinate imprint in 2 or more universes. If there is no coordinate imprint, the universal coordinate jump ability cannot be activated. Ding! The system explanation is complete. Do you wish to explore? Unknown teleportation array? As the system notification sounded in his mind, Yi Xian was stunned for a moment, then became ecstatic. Ever since the system title was upgraded to Level 3 Interstellar Explorer in the Starry Sky Thundertomb in Universe 1 and obtained the ability to jump between universes, he had a very special feeling of anticipation for this kind of randomly triggered system title exploration mission. The halo effect of the Level 3 Interstellar Explorer title already allowed him to perform a universal coordinate jump regardless of distance within the same universe. What about the Level 4 Interstellar Explorer title? The result was as expected. The halo effect of the Level 4 Interstellar Trailblazer title was more practical. It was practically cheating. It could actually achieve a coordinate jump between different universes, even without the need for wormholes. Although the beginner level was limited to performing a planar jump between 2 adjacent universes connected by wormholes, and he had to leave a coordinate imprint in both universes. This was not a problem. Currently, all 3 universes were connected by natural wormholes, and Yi Xian had already branded a jump coordinate in the black hole of life in the first universe. He only needed to brand another one in the third universe. Once the exploration was successful, his system title would be upgraded to level 4, and he would immediately have the qualifications to initiate a beginner dimensional jump. As for the second universe, he would find an opportunity to go there in the future and leave a mark of coordinates. After being agitated for a while, Yi Xian gradually calmed down. After calming down, his mind spun rapidly as he began to think. Naturally, the exploration mission of the system title was not to be missed, and the temptation of the halo ability of the level 4 interstellar pathfinder was indeed great. However, the rewards and risks were equal. The destination of this teleportation array was unknown. If it was in Universe 3, then so be it. Even if it was leading to the other 2 universes, Yi Xian was not afraid. As for the starry sky forbidden grounds like the starry sky lightning tomb, he didn't care about them at all. Any forbidden grounds would definitely have a chance of survival. Moreover, he had the headless infant's corpse by his side, so no matter how dangerous it was, he was confident in his ability to survive. But what if the destination of the teleportation array was some unknown universe, or the boundless void of turbulence? This was a one-way teleportation array that could only be used once, and it would be destroyed. Moreover, there was no return ticket. If that really happened, wouldn't he be like the silver-winged G person, exiled forever? In this situation, even the headless infant's corpse would be helpless. With so many worries, Yi Xian wavered in hesitation, unable to make a decision. At this time, the system's notification sounded again, still asking whether or not to accept the exploration mission. If he kept silent 3 times in a row, this opportunity would be missed, and the system would reject it by default. Thinking of this, Yi Xian's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and unwillingness welled up in him. He gritted his teeth and immediately gave a reply of yes to the exploration mission. At the same time, he requested to postpone it because he had to first prepare the mark of coordinates to Universe 3. It was better to be prepared. The reason why this matter had not been implemented after returning to Universe 3 was because each universe could only leave 1 mark of coordinates, so he had to choose carefully. But now he couldn't care less. Yi Xian decided to solve this matter immediately, and then began the exploration mission of the system title. The Death Star region was located in the central region of Universe 3, in the gap between the 2 major human factions. The geographical location was quite suitable, so Yi Xian could accept the mark of coordinates to Universe 3. Without further ado, after making the decision, Yi Xian immediately set off. He took out the Dongshu shuttle and flew quickly in the Death Star vortex. Soon after, he locked on to the best position and began to mark the jump coordinates. In the blink of an eye, nearly 2 days had passed. Yi Xian, who was sitting cross-legged in the void, opened his eyes, and a touch of fatigue flashed in his eyes. Although this was the second time, and everything was familiar to him, the great pain of having his primordial spirit separated was really unbearable. Even though Yi Xian's cultivation was far from what it was when he first marked the first coordinate in Universe 1, he was still physically and mentally exhausted. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. The jump coordinates to Universe 3 had been successfully marked and integrated into the void. From then on, it would be fixed forever, and there was no trace of it. Even Yi Xian himself could not sense it. It would only appear when the jump ability of the system was activated. After that, it took another 2 days to recuperate his primordial spirit. When Yi Xian opened his eyes again, it had been 4 days since he entered the Death Star vortex. Originally, he should have left for Planet Triumph long ago. Unexpectedly, all kinds of accidents kept happening, and in the end, it was delayed for so long. Next, he would immediately start the exploration mission of the system title. In a short time, he was afraid that he would not have time to leave. However, with the old devil mosquito butcher, there was no need to worry about Planet Triumph. The old wretch could even send a supreme existence of the cosmic light realm flying with a roar. He did not know how strong his cultivation was, but he had always pretended to be a demon slave and called himself master. Even after revealing his strength, he was still like this, which really made people speechless. Yi Xian's heart was full of doubts, but at the moment, he had no time to think about it. Everything could only wait until he finished the exploration mission of the system title, and then he could think about it. Shaking off these thoughts, Yi Xian immediately ordered the system to start the exploration mission immediately. The familiar system prompt sounded in his mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host. The exploration mission of the system title has been activated. Exploration target. The destination of the unknown transmission array. Mission completion condition. Unknown. As the prompt sounded in his mind, ripples suddenly appeared in the empty void in the distance. A small but extremely simple transmission array platform suddenly appeared without warning. Whoosh! Yi Xian's shoulders shook, and he gritted his teeth and rushed over. In the blink of an eye, he was on the transmission array platform, and his face was gloomy. Chapter 3179. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation: The Sixth Palace of 10 Absolutes. Whoosh! As soon as Yi Xian landed, the ancient teleportation platform suddenly shone with a dazzling light. It was unknown what material the platform was made of, but it instantly changed its shape and turned into a ball of energy, wrapping around Yi Xian's body. Finally, it condensed into a ray of light and disappeared into the void. At this time, Yi Xian probably didn't know that he had entered the lair of his mortal enemy. This top-grade teleportation platform was made of extravagant materials and could only be used once. It would be destroyed immediately after use, and it could only teleport one way. It was obviously set up by Xianxia as a backup plan. After all, although the devourer doppelganger that he had his eyes on was very talented, it had just been born. No matter how strong it was not that strong. With this teleportation platform, the primordial spirit of Xianxia's doppelganger could enter the treasured devourer body and complete the refinement and integration. If anything happened, it could safely return to the sixth palace of 10 absolutes immediately. Right now, although it was indeed the treasured devourer body that Xianxia had been thinking about for thousands of years, the primordial spirit that entered the teleportation platform had already changed owners. The 10 Absolute Celestial Palace was the absolute overlord of the human cultivation camp. It occupied half of the universe in the third universe and was a close friend of the immortal dynasty of the technology camp, as well as a secret competitor. The immortal dynasty of the technology camp was an imperial system. The half of the universe that it controlled was the territory of the imperial dynasty. Although there were 3 big empires and countless big and small countries, they were all nominally part of the immortal dynasty. However, it was different in the territory controlled by the cultivation camp. Basically, there were various sects and clans. Although there were some imperial systems and other forms of countries, they were all small fish and shrimps. In addition, in the half of the universe controlled by the cultivation camp, no matter whether it was a country or a cultivation sect, they were all independent of each other, at least nominally. The 10 Absolute Celestial Palace was also a cultivation sect, but its position was unique and transcendent. Although it was nominally not like the immortal dynasty, which commanded the entire cultivation camp, it was still the immortal dynasty. But as a matter of fact, with it dominating the world, even if the sects and countries behind it joined hands, they were still far from being able to compete with it. Its position as the supreme overlord of the cultivators' camp had been confirmed long ago. The ancestral land of the 10 Absolute Celestial Palace was the first palace, also known as the Heaven Absolute Palace. The Palace Master of Heaven Absolute Palace was the highest leader of the 10 Absolute Celestial Palaces. The second palace was called Earth Absolute Palace. The Palace Master of the Earth Extinction Palace was in charge of the external affairs of the sect. The Palace Master of the Earth Extinction Palace was in charge of all interactions with the Undying Dynasty and the Myriad Luo Federation. The third palace was the Absolute Palace. The Palace Master of Renjua Palace was in charge of the punishment of the entire Tenju Celestial Palace. These 3 palaces were the most powerful and most mysterious of the 10 Absolute Celestial Palaces. Their status was transcendent. After that, the 4th to 10th palaces were slightly weaker. Generally, the palace master was only responsible to his own palace, and his authority could not extend to the other 9 palaces. Of the was. The of the absolute celestial palace. Was. Of the ye was. Was of the was of absolutes of heaven. Was. The sky. Was. Heaven. The Heaven Absolute Palace was located in the Central District. The Earth Absolute Palace and the Absolute Palace were not too far from the Central District. The first 3 palaces were the core of the entire sect, standing tall in the Central District of this half of the galaxy. The other 7 palaces were like governors, located at the border of the cultivation camp in different directions. Among them, the 4th, 5th, and 6th absolute celestial palaces bordered the territory of the Immortal Dynasty. The closest to the Death Star field was the 6th absolute celestial palace. Perhaps it was because of this reason that Xianxia chose the Death Star field to nurture his strongest doppelganger. Entering the cultivation camp from the border of the Death Star field, one was already in the star field controlled by the 6th absolute celestial palace. However, if one wanted to go to the headquarters of the 6th absolute celestial palace, it would still take 2 months to reach it. On the way, there were 2 wormholes in the universe. If one entered the wormhole and launched a wormhole jump, the time would be reduced by half, only a month. The headquarters of the 10 absolute celestial palaces were located in different environments. Some were huge celestial bodies, while others were vast continents suspended in the void. The sky was round and the earth was round. There were even places that were similar to ancient cages. For example, the Heaven Absolute Palace was like this. It could not be seen in the central district of the cultivation camp at all. It was located in the void of a small alien plane and was connected to the third universe by a void passage. The entrance passage was in the central district of the cultivation camp, guarded by the Earth Absolute Palace and the Absolute Palace. The headquarters of the 6th Absolute Celestial Palace was a supercontinent with a circumference of millions of miles. If some ordinary celestial bodies were regarded as chess pieces, this 6th Absolute Celestial Palace, which was suspended in the void like other celestial bodies, was as vast as a chessboard. It could be regarded as the state of a normal celestial body after being crushed. The edges of the surroundings were rugged, and the spiritual energy at the bottom was thin. There was no sign of life, so it was not a good place to live. Only the surface of the land was full of spiritual energy, so it was full of life. Not only were there lakes everywhere, but there were also mountain ranges. Although its shape was special and was not spherical like ordinary celestial bodies, this supercontinent had all the characteristics of a celestial body with life, including gravity, atmosphere, abundant vitality, and so on. The headquarters of the 6th Absolute Celestial Palace was located at the top of a giant mountain in the central district of this starry sky continent. A large number of palaces surrounded the peak area, which was grand and extraordinary. But at this moment, this vast area of palaces was quiet, and there were not many people in sight. Except for those who were in seclusion or had gone out, more than half of the upper echelons and disciples of the 6th Absolute Celestial Palace had gone to a certain valley in the northern district of the giant mountain a few days ago. Over there, Palace Master Xianxia had set up a huge starry sky killing array nearly 10,000 years ago. Many alarms could be heard in the killing array. Xianxia was furious and led a large number of powerhouses from the 6th Absolute Celestial Palace to start the killing array. They had been gone for 4 days, and the killing had not ended yet. That was why the headquarters of the 6th Absolute Celestial Palace at the top of the giant mountain was so quiet, with only a few ordinary disciples and a few upper echelons staying behind. This was also the destination of the top one-way teleportation array that Xianxia had left in the Death Star vortex. This array was set up for a quick return, so it was reasonable for the headquarters of the 6th Absolute Celestial Palace to be teleported to. However, the peak of this giant mountain was too vast, and the teleportation destination that Xianxia had set wasn't precisely located. As a result, Xianxia, who was teleported over with a nervous heart, randomly fell into a pool. It was not an ordinary pool, but a hot spring pool. It was a dreamy hot spring pool with dense water vapor floating on the surface. Dense spiritual energy seeped out of the mist, and the hot spring water in the pool was clearly some kind of spiritual spring. But that was not the main point. The main point was that this spiritual spring was not only located in Xianxia's harem, but also in the pool. There were more than 10 beautiful figures splashing water and frolicking. Chapter 3180. Damn the mission. Ah! Oh my God! Someone dropped down, and it was actually a man. Stinking lecher, you actually dare to trespass into the 6th palace of the 10 absolutes. You're simply courting death. What are you waiting for? Our bodies have been seen by him. We must kill him. No. I'll gouge his eyes out first, then kill him. Ha! Is Miss all right? He was actually in a daze? He even had a nosebleed. That damned guy, he must have been frightened by him. As these flustered and angry cries entered his ears, it was precisely because the teleportation was completed that he plunged headfirst into the spirit spring. Xianxia, who was caught off guard, felt an explosion in his mind and was instantly stunned. Following that, more than a dozen incomparably hot and delicate bodies were reflected in his line of sight. Without exception, all of them were completely naked. In any case, it was only a single glance, and those places that should be looked at and should not be looked at were all seen through by Yi Xian. What was going on? What happened to the danger? What happened to the turbulent void? That damn transmission array. It actually threw this prince into a spirit spring bath full of women. It was one thing to see those angry women shouting and killing, but at least they were quite pleasing to the eye. But what the hell was this person who was only a palm's distance away from him? Not only was his face full of black pockmarks, but there was also a large tooth protruding from his slightly opened lips. More importantly, why was this ugly ghost having a nosebleed? She was actually staring at his face with such an infatuated expression. A love-struck fool? As this thought flashed through his mind, Yi Xian shuddered. The hairs on his back stood on end, and he felt very uncomfortable. This was simply too tragic to actually be remembered by such an ugly ghost. In particular, the identity of this ugly ghost was clearly not ordinary. How could someone who could be called a young lady in the 6th palace of the 10 absolutes, and lead such a large group of maidservants to soak in the spirit spring in the open air be an ordinary existence? She must be closely related to Xianxia, either a cultivation partner or a daughter. Well, the former can be ruled out. She was so ugly that Xianxia would not like her even if he was blind. If it was the latter, then it would be even worse. Not only did he suddenly fall into the lair of his sworn enemy, he even saw the body of his daughter, and was conveniently taken by the other party. This matter could no longer be resolved peacefully. Even if Xianxia didn't risk his life and decided to turn hostility into friendship with a smile, the final result would definitely be to drive Yi Xian onto a pedestal and recruit a son-in-law. At the very least, he should throw out the unsaleable goods in his hands first. This was worse than the turbulent void. It was simply fatal. Thinking of this, Yi Xian's face instantly turned green. At this time, he did not care about anything else and did not even have the interest to explain. After shuddering again, he suddenly turned around, jumped out of the spirit spring, and ran away. It wasn't that he didn't want to teleport or fly far away, but the moment he leaped up, an invisible force that was as vast as a mountain instantly pressed down on him. With Yi Xian's half-step black hole realm cultivation, he was only able to leap up a few meters before he was forced to land at the edge of the spirit spring pool. That was clearly the power of the formation here. Not only was it forbidden to fly, but it was also suppressing Yi Xian's cultivation. If there was a ceiling effect, it would be really miserable. He would not be able to escape at all. While running wildly, Yi Xian's mind turned quickly. When he thought of the last possibility, his heart instantly sank to the bottom of the valley. At this moment, the dozen or so maids in the spirit spring also reacted. They didn't care that there wasn't a single strand of hair on their bodies as they rushed onto the shore and quickly chased after Yi Xian. The enraged shouts from their mouths resounded endlessly. "Stinky pervert, where do you think you're going? Stop, I promise I won't beat you up." The cultivation of the dozen or so maidservants was not bad. They were all in the nebula realm. Although they were far inferior to Yi Xian's treasure body doppelganger, they were obviously not suppressed by the power of the formation here. Their speed was even faster than Yi Xian's. Just as he was about to catch up, several of them waved their hands and summoned their own magic weapons, intending to kill him. Yi Xian subconsciously glanced back. His eyes were full of turbulent waves, causing his face to turn slightly red, but then it immediately turned white. He was too unlucky. He never thought that one day he would be chased by a group of naked women shouting to kill him. Unfortunately, he could not escape from them. Once they caught up, the consequences would be horrifying. "Stop! Who told you to chase him? You even summoned your magic weapons. Since he can't escape, let him wander around first. When he's tired, he'll naturally come back." Just at this moment, the body of the ugly ghost who was still bleeding from her nose in the spirit spring pool shook, and she finally returned to her senses. She immediately shouted with a strong aura, but when she reached the end of her sentence, her tone suddenly changed and became incomparably gentle. "Brother June, don't be afraid, they are just playing with you. Go, 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 it's good to run a few laps to vent. Ling Yang understands. Everything has a process of adaptation. Don't worry, you've seen Ling Yang's body anyway. In the end, she can only be yours. You can slowly adapt. I can wait." "Oh right, Don't be a heartless man and abandon Ling Yang. Outsiders can only enter this back courtyard, but not leave. Once you take a step out, you'll attract the full force of the sect protecting Great Formation to kill you. Those below the Genesis realm will definitely die. As for those half a step into the Black Hole realm, they'll be killed on the spot. Hearing these words, Yi Xian felt his vision darken and almost fell, but he did not stop. Instead, he ran even faster. He really did not care about the Sixth Palace's sect protecting Great Formation that could kill a Genesis realm expert. With the headless infant corpse, he could be safe. The key was that this ugly ghost's words revealed a soft chill that made him feel uncomfortable. Not only was she ugly, but she was also scheming. She was definitely a scorpion woman. She was too dangerous. He could not stay here for a second longer. Behind him, the dozen or so maidservants had already stopped and put away their magic weapons the moment the ugly ghost shouted. They looked at each other, and their expressions quickly became strange. They did not continue to pursue, allowing Yi Xian to rush into a purple bamboo forest not far away and disappear. The moment he rushed into the bamboo forest, the familiar system notification sounded in Yi Xian's mind again. Ding! Congratulations! Host. Teleportation complete. You've arrived at the destination. System title exploration mission successfully activated. Mission completion time limit: 30 days. Mission completion requirement: obtain the target's inheritance and refine it. Special reminder: before the mission is completed, it is strictly forbidden to set foot in the area outside the sect protecting Great Formation. Otherwise, the exploration will be considered a failure. Exploration failure punishment. System title will drop by 1 level. Bang! Bang! Just as the system notification in his mind finished speaking, Yi Xian collided head-on with a purple bamboo that was as thick as his waist. Although he didn't feel any pain, he still felt that the stars in front of him were chaotic, and it was completely dark. This damned mission, I'm probably going to be played to death this time. It actually wants me to obtain the inheritance of the Sixth Palace of 10 Ultimates and refine it, and before the mission is completed, I'm not allowed to take a single step out of the sect protecting Great Formation. Chapter 3181. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Xianxia Yi Xian simply sat down in the bamboo forest and fell into deep thought. At this point, he had already understood who set up the teleportation formation and had a general guess about the origin of this avatar. There should be no doubt about it. Obviously, the big crystal egg was the work of the palace master of the Sixth Palace of 10 Ultimates, Xianxia. His purpose was to create a powerful avatar with a devouring innate skill. For this reason, an entire star area had become a sacrifice. The energy in the void and the light and heat of countless stars were all unknowingly swallowed up. Xianxia clearly knew that this might cause problems, so in order to ensure that the completed devouring avatar could return to the Sixth Palace smoothly, he set up the one-way teleportation formation. Who knew that the avatar's avatar had returned, but it was not the primordial spirit it left in Xianxia's body that entered it, but Yi Xian. This was a great loss for Xianxia. The devouring avatar that he had plotted for thousands of years had gone down the drain, and he had also lost Xianxia's avatar. How could he not be angry? In addition, that ugly woman just now should be his daughter, but she was accidentally seen naked by Yi Xian. With all these new and old grudges added together, anyone would be completely furious. Although Yi Xian was not afraid, he was now restrained by the exploration mission. For a month, he had to stay within the range of the sect-protecting formation of the Sixth Palace of 10 Ultimates and could not take a single step out. Otherwise, not only would this exploration mission fail, but his system title, which was originally at level 3, would also be reduced by 1 level, and he would return to level 2 Interstellar Adventurer. This was something he could not accept no matter what. Who knew when the next time he would be able to trigger the system's title exploration mission again? In other words, no matter how depressed he was, he had to obediently stay in the sect-protecting formation of the Sixth Palace of 10 Ultimates for a month. Moreover, he had to find a way to find out what the so-called inheritance treasure of the Sixth Palace of 10 Ultimates was. Get it, and refine it. This was going to cost him his life. The Sixth Palace of the 10 Absolutes was not some inn or post house. How could it be a place where one could stay as they pleased? Xianxia was an unparalleled almighty in the 15th realm, the universe realm. Even the Thunder Origin bead might only be able to severely injure him. The headless infant corpse was Yi Xian's final trump card, so he couldn't reveal it easily. Furthermore, Tian Qianzi wasn't the only one in the sixth palace. There were even 4 vice-palace masters of the cosmic light realm. Among them, Huai Dongzi had been sent to Black Sky City. If there were no accidents, at least 2 of the other 3 would still be in the palace. In addition to the other experts of the 6 palaces, Yi Xian was all alone. How could he stay in this dragon pool for a month? It was simply an impossible mission. The only way is to figure out what the 6th palace of 10 Ultimates inheritance is before Tian Qianzi finds out. Then I have to seize it and take it away. After muttering to himself for a while, Yi Xian's eyes shone with a bright light. He stood up as he muttered to himself. He decided to return to the spirit spring pool and start with that ugly female ghost. He wanted to force out everything he needed to know. This was not the technological faction. Although there were definitely technological treasures such as battleships, those things were definitely not popular in the Cultivation faction. Therefore, Yi Xian's personal star communication system was completely useless here. They didn't even have a star network with the star superbrain as the central intelligence. It was completely unrealistic to hack into their star network to obtain information like he did in the technological faction or the Demonkin star region. At this time, Zhao Lingyang, who was in the spiritual spring, had come ashore to change her clothes with the help of the dozen maidservants. Seeing Yi Xian return with a gloomy expression, the maidservants' expressions changed. Even Zhao Lingyang was slightly stunned. "Brother Jun, you've thought it through so quickly? Someone is going to marry Younger. Younger is so happy." As she spoke, Zhao Lingyang's face, which was full of black spots, suddenly turned red. Her eyes were watery as she glanced shyly at Yi Xian. She covered her mouth and giggled. "Wretch!" Yi Xian felt like he was going to throw up. His stomach was dry heaving. She was so ugly that she could scare ghosts to death when she went out at night. How could she still have the nerve to be so bashful? No, he had to destroy this ugly female ghost. He had to get rid of an evil for the people. At the same time, he could force out what the 6th palace of 10 Ultimates inheritance was. The ugly female ghost's cultivation was not bad. She was also in the black hole realm. Moreover, there were more than a dozen maidservants around her. Although their cultivation was not as good as Yi Xian's, none of them were suppressed by the formation. On the surface, Yi Xian, who was suppressed by the formation, did not seem to be a match for them. However, he knew that he was very confident. Once he used his devouring inherent skill, these maidservants in front of him would definitely not be able to withstand it and would be sucked dry. At most, he would just stop halfway and leave them alive. Yi Xian could not bear to ruthlessly destroy flowers, even though there was an ugly female ghost among them. When he thought of this, his eyes lit up, and he was about to make a move. At this time, a long laugh suddenly came from outside the small courtyard. "Ha ha ha! Who wants to marry my Younger? This is a joyous occasion." As soon as the voice fell, an extremely burly figure pushed open the courtyard door and strode in. It was an old man in a purple robe. His temperament was elegant and extraordinary. The aura around his body was faintly discernible. It was far more powerful than Huai Dongzi. Imperceptibly, he gave Yi Xian an extremely strong sense of danger. Even the hair on his back stood up. Although this was an innate treasure body, not a life of flesh and blood, but a crystal form, he still felt that way. Everything was because the opponent's cultivation was too strong. Even if it was only half a wisp of it imperceptibly, and it might not be intentional, he still felt that way. The Supreme Almighty of the Universe realm was indeed not to be underestimated. Without a doubt, this burly old man was Tian Qianzi's original body. At this moment, Yi Xian was already considering contacting the headless infant corpse, or immediately getting the devouring system to transfer the Rai D seal from the original body's sea of consciousness. In that case, once an unforeseen event happened, he could use the seal at any time and use the Thunder Origin Pearl to kill Tian Qianzi. With a few more, he still had a chance to deal with the opponent. "Daddy, what are you saying? It's so embarrassing." Without waiting for Yi Xian to make a move, the ugly ghost Zhao Lingyang had already stomped her feet and complained coquettishly. Then, she turned around and stole a glance at Yi Xian. She covered her face and turned around to run to a small courtyard not far away from a small courtyard. The dozen or so maids looked at Yi Xian with strange expressions, bowed to the old man, and then hurried away. At this time, the burly old man Tian Qianzi's gaze swept towards Yi Xian. The moment he saw him, the corners of his eyes twitched. You. He saw Yi Xian's state at a glance. He was emitting a dense aura of the marrow-devouring mother. Xianxia instantly understood. No wonder he suddenly appeared here. It turned out that this person had snatched the good fortune that originally belonged to him. He had teleported here through that one-way teleportation array. Chapter 3182. Translator, Audiobook Studio Editor. Audiobook Studio an equal match, you've already refined the treasured body? Prince Xian of the Immortal Dynasty? With a gloomy expression, Xianxia suppressed the anger in his heart and asked tentatively. As the head of the 6th palace of the Jianghu celestial palaces, he naturally recognized Yi Xian's identity at a glance. After all, the appearance of this innate treasured body was exactly like Yi Xian, and this was no secret. Even the demon domain in the first universe suddenly realized that the Black Mosquito tribe's holy son was the prince of the immortal dynasty of the human race, Long Xian. This matter caused a great sensation in the demon domain, and the demon emperor even made a series of moves. This is a story to be told later. Now, not only did Xianxia recognize Yi Xian's identity, but he also clearly understood that he had already entered this innate treasured body and refined it into a clone. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and nodded. The old man didn't seem to have any intention of making a move. He pondered for a moment and then understood. This time, Xianxia and Huai Dongzi had caused a great commotion in Black Sky City. The key was that they had activated the secret formation at the end and failed to capture all the fleets of the large and small forces in the Death Star field. Some people still managed to escape, and the news couldn't be hidden at all. Although no one knew what happened in the Death Star vortex, how could a discerning person not see that all this was related to the Jianghu celestial palaces? At this moment, Xianxia was obviously under pressure from all sides. The Tianji clan in the first universe was fine as they were originally enemies, but he couldn't ignore the doubts of the various races in the second universe, especially the Immortal Dynasty. There might even be different voices within the Jianghu celestial palaces. In the face of all this, Xianxia more or less had to give an explanation. Now that the treasured body clone he wanted had been refined by Yi Xian, even if he erased Yi Xian's primordial spirit, he wouldn't be able to use this treasured body. Rather than that, he might as well do something with Yi Xian to resolve the pressure from the Immortal Dynasty. As long as the technology faction didn't pursue this matter, the various races in the second universe would be easy to deal with. The doubts of the other 9 celestial palaces within the Jianghu celestial palaces could also be stopped. Thinking of this, Yi Xian lightly smiled and casually sat down on the stone chair beside the spirit spring. Those fleets couldn't have all been destroyed by you, right? Stutter. He stared at Yi Xian for a while, pondered for a moment, then sat down as well. Separated from Yi Xian by the stone table, he laughed involuntarily. Looks like you didn't get much out of it after all this time. Although this sovereign lost a devouring avatar, at least I obtained a son-in-law. With your status, you will be able to bring me quite a bit of benefits in the future. But you, the dignified Prince Xian, gave up your physical body with the royal bloodline and thought that you had picked up a treasure. In the end, what you got was a clone that had not fully matured and had a congenital defect. With your current stuttering condition, I'm sure you won't dare to return to the immortal planet, right? That's even better. Stay here and accompany my beloved daughter, Ling Yang. As for the Empire and the outside world, don't worry. I will give them a good explanation in your name. This matter can be considered as unintentional. You and this lord's beloved daughter are clearly a good match for each other. Ha ha ha. Xianxia stood up as he laughed. He raised his hand and shot a ray of light. Yi Xian was caught off guard. Before he could react, the ray of light had already entered his body. Don't be nervous. This is only the restriction seal of the 6th Palace's Great Protective Formation. You are my son-in-law, and you will marry Ling Yang in a month. How can I hurt you? However, in this 1 month, it's best that you don't take a single step out of the Great Sect Protecting Formation, in case I misunderstand. In addition, the restriction imprint just now has extremely limited authority. Although it can allow you to walk out of this backyard and even set foot on the entire peak, it does not include the area outside the Great Sect Protecting Formation. Don't make a mistake. Otherwise, the formation will attack you with all its might. That's what you asked for. Also, weren't you very concerned about the fleets of the various races? Although this matter is coming to an end, it is not completely over yet. Since we are going to be a family in the future, my son-in-law, Please lend me a hand and clean up this matter. Don't worry. The entrance to the Killing Void Formation is also within the range of the Great Protective Formation of the 6th Palace. With the restriction seal that I gave you just now, you can walk out of the formation at any time as long as everything in it is resolved. It just so happens that your devouring treasure body also needs a large amount of energy to grow. Consider this a meeting gift from me to you. Go, ha ha ha. He was clearly trying to drag Yi Xian down with him. The fleets of the various races that were plotted against all had powerful clans and forces behind them. The 6th Palace might not be able to handle it alone. Now, he wanted to resolve this matter with his identity as Prince Xian, but he was worried that Yi Xian would be unwilling to do so. His current action was clearly to take Yi Xian's authority as a sign of his allegiance. Whoosh! Following Tianqianzi's loud laughter, he waved his hand, and a fierce light instantly enveloped Yi Xian's body. The latter already understood what he was going to do and naturally couldn't resist. He just sat there quietly without any reaction. In an instant, he was enveloped by the fierce white light and rushed to a restricted area on the north side of the giant peak. He entered the entrance of a void passage and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Father, where did you take him? Just as Yi Xian's figure disappeared, the ugly ghost Zhao Lingyang ran out from the side villa. She had a worried look on her face as she pouted and said, Father, he is Lingyang's idol. I won't allow you to hurt him. After all this time, this girl had already recognized Yi Xian's identity. Coincidentally, she was actually a fan of Prince Xian. It was no wonder that she was so infatuated the moment she saw him. It had nothing to do with her extremely ugly appearance and the fact that she would fall for any man she saw. Don't worry, I have already discussed with him. The date of your wedding has been set. It will be in a month. Looking at Zhao Lingyang, Tianqianzi's face was full of love. He said gently, during this month, I happen to need to handle some matters. I will also prepare for your wedding. In order to prevent that brat from having other thoughts, I still need to show my allegiance. Otherwise, even after the wedding, he will still run away. You don't want to stay with such a husband every day, right? Chapter 3183. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio Immortal Mortal Technique. After Tianqianzi left, the group of maidservants walked out. Some were stunned, some were pleasantly surprised, and some were enlightened, as if they had finally recalled something. For a moment, there were cries of surprise, and it was a lively scene. Oh my God! No wonder he looked so familiar. It's actually Prince Xian. Miss, I'm not dreaming, am I? That's Prince Xian we're talking about. How could he come to our 6th palace? And he fell from the sky. I must be dreaming. My head is still exploding. It's too unreal. That's great. Miss will be marrying Prince Xian in a month. When the time comes, we'll all be dowry maidservants. We'll be able to serve our idol for the rest of our lives. How blissful. Miss, why are you still in a daze? Hurry up and go into seclusion. Your immortal mortal technique should really make a breakthrough. How can you marry our idol with this ugly appearance? It's too imperfect. Only your original appearance is a match for Prince Xian. When the two of you stand together, you'll amaze the 3 great universes. Hearing these words, Zhao Lingyang's ugly face immediately turned red. Prince Xian wasn't just her idol. He was also the idol of these maidservants who had grown up with her. However, these maidservants were obviously too immoral. They had never said that she was ugly in her current appearance. This time, for Prince Xian, they actually called her ugly. Thinking of this, Zhao Lingyang suddenly became somewhat angry. She turned her head and hit the servant girl who called her an ugly ghost. She gnashed her teeth and said, "Good for you, Ziyun. You actually dare to call this young miss an ugly ghost. I think your heart is rippling with love, right? Once Long Xian comes, you bitch will immediately betray him. See how I'll deal with you." As she spoke, she reached out and tickled a maidservant named Ziyun a few times. Aya, ha ha ha. Help. Sisters. Miss is angry. She clearly knows that Ziyun is ticklish. She actually fell out with her sisters for Prince Xian. Ziyun immediately laughed. She laughed as she ran away. The group of maidservants immediately became a mess. The entire backyard was bustling with noise and excitement. After a long time, they gradually quieted down. After a short while, the group of maidservants seemed to have had enough and gradually quieted down. Zhao Lingyang, who was slightly sweating, turned her head and looked around at everyone. Finally, she brought up the important matter. All right, this young lady is going to enter seclusion. A month is a bit rushed, but it shouldn't be a problem to end this period of cultivation in the mortal world and seize the opportunity to make a breakthrough. All of you wait outside the villa. This time, there can't be any accidents. This young lady must restore her original appearance. Marriage is a big matter. As she spoke, Zhao Lingyang's waist swayed slightly as she turned and walked towards the villa. Soon, a light pink protective barrier was erected, enveloping the entire villa. Zi Yun and the other girls regained their solemn expressions and sat down cross-legged around Bi Wan. They didn't say anything else as they stood guard over her. The Immortal Mortal technique was also one of the top legacy techniques of the 6th Palace of the 10 Ultimates. It was on the same level as Palace Master Tian Chenzi's Billion Incarnations technique. The Billion Incarnations technique emphasized the creation of billions of incarnations. When cultivated to the highest level, these billions of incarnations would become one, and the Great Tao would be formed. What the Immortal Mortal technique pursued was the cultivation of the mortal world. To cultivate this technique, one had to experience everything in the mortal world. Although there were no incarnations, the original body was ever-changing. It was as if one had entered the mortal world to train. All kinds of identities and appearances had to be experienced. Finally, one's state of mind would reach perfection. It was as if one had ascended to immortality in the mortal world, and the Great Tao would be formed. Zhao Lingyang wasn't very old, less than 100 years old. It could be said that she was extremely young. She was the daughter of Tian Chenzi when he was old. This girl was born with a natural beauty. Whether it was her figure or appearance, she was the best choice. She wasn't inferior to the likes of the Purplish Warbler and Ying Tai. What was even more stunning was her state of mind. She was simple, kind, and pure. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she had the heart of a child. Ever since she started cultivating the worldly immortal technique, Zhao Lingyang's cultivation and strength had skyrocketed. She had personally encountered all kinds of people in the mortal world with her original body. There were even a few years when she had been begging for cultivation outside. She looked like an old beggar with a foul stench all over her body. This was not a disguise, but because she had cultivated the worldly immortal technique, her original body had really evolved into that appearance. That time, Zhao Lingyang spent 3 years cultivating outside. As she begged, she experienced the hardships of the mortal world and cultivated her heart in the mortal world. After 3 years she had a breakthrough. Her cultivation and strength had skyrocketed by 2 major realms. Even Tian Chenzi, who cultivated the Billion Incarnations technique, was dumbfounded. Although her current cultivation wasn't high, that wasn't the case. It was because she was still in another stage of cultivating her heart in the mortal world. Her cultivation and other aspects were suppressed. This time, Zhao Lingyang had already gone through 2 years of cultivating her heart with such an ugly appearance. She had been traveling outside and had just returned to the 6th Palace not long ago. She was preparing to cultivate in seclusion for the breakthrough. Yi Xian's arrival had only allowed her to break through this time's mortal heart refinement and pluck the heart refinement Tao fruit a little earlier. Yi Xian knew nothing about Zhao Lingyang. At this moment, he had been sent by Tian Chenzi to avoid killing formation in the North Core area of the 6th Palace. This void killing formation wasn't a normal space. It was similar to the prison in the depths of the Devil Emperor planet that was connected to the Forbidden Valley. There was a space passage that connected to the peak of the 6th Palace. A killing formation had been set up in the entire inner void. After the Heaven and Earth Reversal 5 Elements teleportation formation that had been set up in the Death Star field was activated. A large number of battleships, fortresses, and fortresses of various forces had been teleported here. In the past 4 days, most of these battleships had been destroyed by the void killing formation. Only a few starry fortresses and a small cosmic stronghold with a diameter of 50,000 meters were left. They were from various races of the Federation of the Second Universe, and one of them was from the Tianji clan. With the arrival of Yi Xian, the experts of the 6th Palace of the 10 Ultimates who had stayed in the void killing formation to maintain the operation of the formation left one after another. Finally, the void passage was closed, trapping Yi Xian and a dozen remaining starry fortresses and small strongholds in the void-killing formation. Only when the battle was over could it be opened again. In front of them was a smoke-filled void of the universe. There were some stars in the void, but they were obviously not formed naturally. They were man-made. These stars were the eyes of the formation. The entire killing formation of the void was like a huge net of killing, enveloping the entire vast void. These man-made stars were the nodes of the net of killing. Originally, there was a peerless powerhouse of the sixth palace of the 10 ultimates guarding each star. Under the activation of all of them, the power of the great void killing formation was boundless. Even the supreme powerhouses of the 15th realm, the universe realm, would not be able to escape easily once they fell into the formation. Chapter 3184. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio Descent of the Black Hole. This time, the Black Sky City used the great technique of reversing heaven and earth 5 elements teleportation to teleport them to the core of the 6th palace. There were close to 1,000 battleships from the fleets of the various forces in the Death Star field. Some of the star-level battleships had already been destroyed during the Great Void teleportation. When they arrived at the Great Void killing array, they were already damaged ships. Then, from the damaged parts of the ships, a large number of Starry Sky warriors fell out. None of them could survive the first round of attacks from the Great Void killing array. They were reduced to pieces of flesh and blood, with no signs of life left. They floated in the void filled with dense killing intent. Then, the second round of attacks was launched. A large number of star nodes that filled the Great Void killing array emitted billions of sword rays that intertwined into a net. It was unknown how many Starry Sky warriors were killed. Some of the smaller fortresses with a diameter of 5,000 meters could not withstand it and collapsed, turning into wreckage. It filled the entire void. 2 days ago, the third round of attacks was launched. This time, it was personally controlled by Xianxia. Countless sword rays of various sizes shot out from the countless star nodes of the Great Void killing array. In the end, they gathered into a few 10,000-meter-long killing swords that flew back and forth. Even the large fortresses with a diameter of 10,000 meters could not withstand it and were disintegrated. Among them, the small fortresses with a diameter of 50,000 meters shot out huge energy light pillars. The super meteorite cannons continued to wreak havoc. There were more than a dozen fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters. They all shot out death ray cannons with a diameter of 20,000 meters. The fierce battle lasted for 2 whole days. During this time, some of the star nodes of the Great Void killing array were destroyed. However, some of these fortresses were also disintegrated and headed towards destruction. A large number of sword rays shot out from the countless star nodes of the Great Void killing array, turned into a terrifying heavenly sword with a diameter of 20,000 meters. It was not inferior to the death ray cannons of the fortresses in the slightest. As it moved unhindered, it cut down 3 fortresses in just 1 day. However, the 6th palace of the 10 ultimates also suffered great losses. Apart from the destruction of half of the star nodes of the killing void formation, some of the 6th palace's experts who were in charge of the star nodes had also perished. The first round of slaughter had just ended, and both sides had just taken a break. Just as they were preparing for the 4th round of battle, Xianxia suddenly left. Then, the order quietly came, and a large number of experts guarding the nodes of the 6th palace of the 10 ultimates retreated. In the end, the passage of the Great Killing Void formation was closed, and Yi Xian descended from the sky. He was surrounded by the remaining Starry Sky fortresses and small fortresses. Long Xian? Damn it, those fellows have all retreated, so why did they only teleport him here? What is the 10 Extreme Celestial Palace trying to do? Do you want us to have a civil war with the Undying Dynasty? So they can just sit back and reap the benefits? No, can't you see it? Long Xian didn't have a trace of surprise on his face. Clearly, he had already expected this. He wasn't forced to teleport here at all. It's more like he was prepared. Damn it, scheme, this is definitely a huge scheme. The Undying Dynasty and the 10 Ultimate Celestial Palace have joined hands. This time, they have ruthlessly tricked us and the other races of the second universe. That Death Star vortex is clearly a trap. Long Xian deliberately lured us closer, and the 10 Ultimate Celestial Palace's Black Heaven City suddenly launched an attack. They are in cahoots. What do the humans want to do? Do they want to provoke a civil war between the 3rd universe and the 2nd universe? Are they trying to split the Wan Luo Federation? They are the sinners of the Federation. They are too bold. Kill Long Xian. This matter is not over yet. Yes, join hands to kill Long Xian, and then we will force our way out. This matter must be reported to the Federation. The humans are going to rebel. Along with the cries of alarm, a monstrous mood quickly brewed. The experts in the more than a dozen Starry Sky fortresses and small fortresses were all enraged. Even those from the Tianji race were the same. Under such circumstances, they actually joined hands against a common enemy. For a moment, they actually joined hands and clamored to kill Yi Xian. Boom! Boom! A series of loud explosions resounded. Nearly 10 starry sky fortresses all fired death ray cannons with a diameter of 20,000 meters. The other small fortresses with a diameter of 50,000 meters were not willing to be left behind. At the same time, the super meteorite cannon's energy beam fired. The scorching white light and the mysterious black death ray cannon's energy beam intertwined into a net, enveloping Yi Xian, who had just arrived. This was clearly the rhythm to kill him instantly and completely cut off his life force. Originally, I was still a little hesitant. Now it seems that there is really no need. The innate treasure bodies devouring innate skill. This is really exciting. Boom! Yi Xian stood in the void, at the center of this enormous void-killing array. His face was expressionless, without the slightest trace of emotion. As he muttered to himself, he brazenly activated this treasure body's devouring innate skill. A powerful and terrifying suction force suddenly appeared from Yi Xian's treasure body clone. Although it was formless, it was much more powerful than the suction force of an ordinary black hole. In the blink of an eye, the 3 starry sky fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters suddenly became sluggish and stopped in their tracks. This was only the beginning. At this time, Yi Xian was like a terrifying beast that had just been born. It wanted to devour everything. It was just like how the devouring marrow essence had absorbed the energy of the void and the light and heat of countless stars in the process of nurturing him. It had even turned an entire vast star region into a land of death as it devoured everything. It was just as tyrannical. It was just as fierce. It was just as ruthless and merciless. Boom! Boom! The 3 starry sky fortresses closest to him exploded instantly without any suspense. All the starry sky experts and resources in the fortresses were exposed to the dark void inside the death vortex. In an instant, they withered and withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. All the resources in the fortresses, including the starry sky experts who were caught off guard and were in a panic at the moment. Then, the other smaller fortresses and starry sky fortresses followed suit without any suspense. A series of loud explosions rang out. The situation was still very strange. Although such huge space fortresses and starry sky fortresses had completely disintegrated and exploded, none of them showed the flames that should have been there. Clearly, they had been forcibly pulled and disintegrated by an invisible and strange force. All the resources and starry sky experts, like the 3 starry sky fortresses that had been destroyed half a second ago, began to wither and wither rapidly. The energy that had been extracted turned into an invisible storm that surged into Yi Xian's body. Even the energy beams of the huge black death ray cannons trembled violently and disintegrated before they could hit Yi Xian's body. Then they were devoured together. From this moment on, Yi Xian's treasure body could no longer be seen. The place where he had been standing had turned into a huge vortex-like black hole. Once this innate devouring talent was activated, it was as if a black hole had descended and wanted to swallow everything. Chapter 3185. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Black Hole Great Perfection. Damn it, what the hell is going on? Where's Long Xian? Where did he go? What kind of supernatural power is this? He disappeared in an instant. Did he summon a black hole? It wants to devour everything. No, the situation is too strange. Even if it's a normal black hole, it shouldn't have such a terrifying suction force. It actually crushed a 100,000-meter diameter starry sky fortress in an instant. Where did this invisible suction force come from? It's so terrifying. Heavens, run! The fortress is disintegrating, and all the resources inside are being devoured, including us. Our cultivation base and vitality are quickly draining away. This is definitely not a natural universe black hole. This is a supreme demonic technique related to the Jianghu celestial palaces. It wants to devour everything and turn us into flesh and blood. This is terrifying and infuriating. The human race is really going to rebel. The Jianghu celestial palaces and the everlasting dynasty have joined hands. One is in the light, the other is in the dark. They want to kill us. Their scheme is too shocking. Screech! Screech! As all the starry fortresses and small fortresses disintegrated, all the resources and experts in the starry sky were exposed. Moreover, their cultivation base and vitality were rapidly being devoured. Shocked and angry cries quickly sounded and spread throughout the entire void-killing formation. Not only were there experts from various races in the Second Universe's Federation, but there were also the higher-ups of the Tianji clan. There were actually 2 cosmic realm experts in the highest command. However, they were both from a race in the Second Universe's Federation. The cultivation base of the Tianji clan's higher-ups was not very high. They were only at the 13th realm, the Void Realm. At this time, facing the power of the black hole vortex formed by Yi Xian's devouring treasured physique, the cultivation base and vitality of these experts were rapidly draining away. Even the 2 cosmic realm experts of the other races withered a lot in an instant. They didn't dare to get too close. They cried out in alarm and hurriedly retreated in horror. This black hole vortex was too terrifying. Its power was too strange. It could even disintegrate and devour the antimatter energy light beam of the death ray cannon. They didn't dare to lightly face it. At this moment, the only thought in his mind was to quickly retreat and leave this place. But even so, no matter how quickly they retreated, in this sealed void, the power of the black hole vortex was still everywhere. There was no way to escape. Even if they retreated to the most remote corner, the cultivation strength and vitality in their bodies were still rapidly draining away. The power of the innate devouring treasure body's devouring talent was so terrifying. At the same time, in the deepest part of the black hole, Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the middle of the black hole with his eyes closed. The boundless energy in the void was being rapidly sucked in by this devouring vortex formed by Yi Xian's devouring innate skill, gushing into Yi Xian's body. This caused his cultivation base to rise at a terrifying speed. Although more than half of the energy had been used to repair the innately damaged innate treasured body, this was only less than half of the energy. Including the consumption and loss during the refining and conversion process, the amount that was truly absorbed by him was actually less than a third. However, it was still extremely terrifying. Boom! The roar of a breakthrough in cultivation base rang out in Yi Xian's body. In less than a minute, his cultivation base ushered in the first breakthrough. He had finally reached the black hole realm. Everything did not stop there. After breaking through to the first stage of the black hole realm, the innate treasured body's cultivation base was still rising rapidly. This was the biggest advantage of this devouring treasure body. In addition to the devouring innate skill, as long as there was enough energy for it to devour, its cultivation base would continue to rise rapidly. There was no bottleneck at all. There was also no problem of the state of mind. As the cultivation base of the innate treasured body increased, Yi Xian's original primordial spirit, which had merged with this treasured body clone, would also benefit. For example, Yi Xian's original cultivation base was originally only at the 6th stage, the nebula realm. However, after entering this treasured body clone, his original primordial spirit merged with the innate treasured body. This was equivalent to feeling the power of the 8th stage, the black hole realm, in advance. This feeling was branded in the primordial spirit. In the future, when Yi Xian's original primordial spirit returned to his original physical body, the comprehension of the primordial spirit in advance would also be beneficial for his original body's cultivation base breakthrough. This would lead to the improvement of his original physical body's cultivation base. This was especially so when he encountered a bottleneck in his cultivation base. After all, the original primordial spirit in the innate treasured body clone had already experienced and felt the power of that level in advance. At this moment, as the black hole vortex formed by the devouring innate skill continuously sucked in the massive amount of energy from the void around the killing void formation into the innate treasured body, its cultivation base did not stop after breaking through to the first stage of the black hole realm. Not long after, the rumbling sound of a breakthrough could be heard from Yi Xian's body. It was like thunder, and not only did it increase the cultivation base of the innate treasured body, but it also shook Yi Xian's original primordial spirit time and time again. In his mind, the familiar sound of the devouring system rang again and again. The interval was at least 1 or 2 minutes, and at most 3 minutes. Every time the sound of a notification rang out, it was accompanied by a loud rumbling sound of cultivation base. This meant that the innate treasured body's cultivation base had broken through again. Ding! Congratulations to the host. Your doppelganger has broken through. Your current cultivation base is at the 2nd stage of the black hole realm. Ding! Congratulations to the host. Your doppelganger has broken through. Your current cultivation base is at the 3rd stage of the black hole realm. Ding! Congratulations to the host. Every time the cultivation base increased, not only did the doppelganger's cultivation base increase rapidly, but even Yi Xian's original primordial spirit seemed to have been baptized. Every rumbling sound of cultivation base was accompanied by a sublimation of the original primordial spirit's soul. The understanding and comprehension of the mysteries of cultivation base were directly imprinted in his mind, as if he had an epiphany. In less than 20 minutes, Yi Xian's original primordial spirit had grown much, much stronger. During this process, his entire consciousness felt as if he was sitting under a Bodhi tree that was comprehending the Tao. Large amounts of light from the great Tao poured down from the top of the tree time and time again, washing and baptizing his primordial spirit. With every impact, his primordial spirit became more solid. In addition, a large amount of profound mysteries related to the breakthrough of cultivation base appeared in his mind and were deeply imprinted in his mind. All of this was accumulated and stored in Yi Xian's original primordial spirit. Once the original primordial spirit returned to the original physical body in the future, just the comprehension of the breakthrough of cultivation base would greatly benefit the original physical body. Furthermore, the baptism of the primordial spirit time and time again would immediately lead to the growth of the original physical body's cultivation base. It could be said that this time, although it was only Yi Xian's doppelganger devouring energy and increasing its cultivation base, because it was Yi Xian's original primordial spirit that had entered this doppelganger, the result was no different from the original physical body's cultivation base. In fact, the original physical body's cultivation base was also increasing stealthily. Chapter 3186. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Sprout Black Hole Level 9 Perfection. In less than half an hour, the cultivation of Yi Xian's devouring avatar had soared from the 7th Great Realm, the 9th stage of the Star River Realm, to the 8th Great Realm, the 9th stage of the Black Hole Realm. An entire level of cultivation had been raised in less than 30 minutes. This was the first time Yi Xian had used the innate treasure body's devouring innate skill. He did not expect the results to be so terrifying. He almost could not believe it. One had to know that most of the energy had been used to repair the innate defects of the treasure body. In addition, the loss of energy from refining the energy had also been consumed. The treasure body's devouring innate skill had absorbed less than a third of the energy. Unfortunately, after reaching level 9 perfection of the black hole level 9 perfection, Yi Xian's cultivation breakthrough noises that had been rumbling in his body every few minutes for the past half an hour no longer appeared. Even so, the black hole vortex formed by the innate treasure body's devouring innate skill was still absorbing energy from the surrounding void and continuously pouring it into the treasure body. Although the momentum of the black hole vortex had weakened by more than half, it did not stop. Obviously, before the energy in the outside world was completely absorbed, the innate devouring ability of the innate treasure body wouldn't stop unless Yi Xian took the initiative to end it. Soon, another 5 minutes passed. Although the amount of energy pouring into the innate treasure body had decreased by a lot, it was still flowing like a trickle. However, the innate treasure body's cultivation realm did not change anymore. Yi Xian was confused at first, but then he came to a realization. If nothing unexpected happened, this innate treasure's devouring inherent skill should only be able to raise his cultivation by one large realm at a time. After absorbing enough, it wouldn't continue to increase explosively. This was understandable. Any terrifying innate skill had a limit. One level at a time should be the limit of the innate treasure body's devouring innate treasure body. Every time the treasure body reached this limit, it would automatically stop breaking through. It probably needed some time to stabilize and digest the devouring innate skill and increase in cultivation. After everything was under control, it could start devouring innate skill again and continue to improve. Upon realizing this, Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief and became even happier. This was the safest way to do it. If it was true that as long as there was energy to absorb, his cultivation base would continuously increase explosively. If this continued, even Yi Xian himself would be frightened out of his wits. Something like reaching the 15th Great Realm, the Universe Realm, in one go, was tantamount to suicide. His innate treasure body might not be able to withstand such a terrifying degree of explosive increase in strength. Even if he could withstand it, Yi Xian's primordial spirit would not be able to withstand it. In the end, he would definitely be lost and suffer from qi deviation. Right now, as the innate treasure body no longer absorbed the energy that had entered its body, other than a portion of the energy that had been used to repair the innate defects of the treasure body, the other small portion actually flowed towards Yi Xian's original body, which was being nurtured by Yi Xian's treasure body, and poured into it. With a thought in his mind, Yi Xian immediately dispelled the thought of immediately stopping this kind of devouring innate skill. He looked inside his body, and his primordial spirit inside the innate treasure body focused on his physical body, feeling the changes in his physical body. Ding! Congratulations to host. The primordial spirit seed has sprouted. Current status: thriving. Just at this time, the familiar system prompt sounded again in the mind of Yi Xian's original primordial spirit. The primordial spirit seed that he had placed in his original body's sea of consciousness had suddenly sprouted. This surprise came too suddenly, and Yi Xian was completely unable to accept it. If he remembered correctly, the system had clearly said that using this method of condensing a primordial spirit seed to temper the avatar, it would take nearly 100 years for the primordial spirit seed to fully mature and for the avatar to successfully condense. And how long had it been? The primordial spirit seed that was being nurtured in his original body's sea of consciousness had actually sprouted? And it had even entered a state of thriving growth. Could it be that the 100 years of nurturing was about to end in such a short period of time? Realizing this, Yi Xian was immediately overjoyed. Obviously, the reason for this was greatly related to the energy that was flowing into his original body like a stream. After this energy entered his original body, it should have directly entered the sea of consciousness of Yi Xian's original body, and was absorbed by the primordial spirit seed that was being nurtured in the sea of consciousness, which accelerated its rapid germination. But this was definitely not the main reason. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for the avatar system that had just been activated by Yi Xian to not have such a prompt before. Yi Xian's original primordial spirit entered the avatar's body, and the primordial spirit seed that originally belonged to the avatar was placed in the sea of consciousness of the original body to nurture. Although this method was unorthodox, it was impossible for the avatar system not to have deduced it. If this method could nourish the primordial spirit seed from the avatar's precious body, the avatar system would have recorded it long ago. In fact, this was indeed the case. At present, Yi Xian's original primordial spirit had already fused with the avatar's precious body, and could not directly enter his original body from the precious body. Therefore, he could only control everything in his original body through the devouring system, and could not directly peek into everything that was happening in his original body's sea of consciousness. If he could see it with his own eyes, he would be even more shocked. This was because the scene that was happening in his original body's sea of consciousness was too miraculous and extraordinary. Even Yi Xian had never seen it before. The vast sea of consciousness undulated, and from the cultivation waves that represented the realm of Yi Xian's original body, a small gray sapling was rapidly growing. Although there was no soil, its roots were directly rooted in the cultivation waves in the sea of consciousness. As it undulated, a mysterious gray aura burst forth. During this process, the precious treasures and divine ability imprints that were originally floating above Yi Xian's sea of consciousness also shot out rays of light from time to time, entering the small gray sapling. As it grew rapidly, some kind of mysterious imprint was left on it. There was no doubt that every ray of light that shot out from the precious treasures in the sea of consciousness was changing the intrinsic nature of the primordial spirit that represented Yi Xian's avatar. The gray light that poured out from the small sapling's body was becoming more and more mysterious. There were a total of 6 precious treasures and divine ability imprints floating in the sea of consciousness of Yi Xian's original body. In the center of the sea of consciousness was a mysterious gray pagoda and a small lightning seal that was covered in countless green and gold lightning bolts. In the other 4 directions, the dark purple spirit source core was resonating with the void essence crystal. The small golden bow that represented the divine ability of the fallen sky bow was communicating with the black gold dragon scale that possessed both the bloodlines of the divine golden dragon and the primordial demon dragon after its mutation. Chapter 3187. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Blossom and Bear Fruit Whoosh. A beam of gray light shot out from the Tower of Desolate Antiquity, sinking into the small gray tree that was floating on the surface of the sea of consciousness. The small gray tree burst forth with a gray light, and in an instant, it grew by about a foot in height. Then, another faint sound of something breaking through the air was heard. A ray of greenish gold light, which seemed to be surrounded by countless tiny green and golden lightning bolts, entered the little gray tree's body and caused it to grow by another foot. It was now a meter tall. Soon after, the small golden bow, the azure dragon scale, the void essence crystal and the dark purple spirit source core lined up and shot out a beam of dark light. Each beam of light had a different color and entered the small gray tree floating in the knowledge sea below one by one. After another 4 times of rapid growth, the small gray tree that was originally only about 1 meter tall suddenly grew to about 2 meters tall. It still hadn't stopped, but the growth speed had slowed down a lot. It was almost half an inch higher now. At this rate, it would not be long before it stopped growing. Sure enough, after another 3 minutes, the great tree, which had grown to a height of about 2.5 meters, seemed to have completely stopped growing. The energy that had entered Yi Xian's body and been refined by the innate treasure body had become even smaller. Some of it entered the body of the great tree, while some entered Yi Xian's sea of consciousness directly. It was also at this time that a small flower bud grew on the 2.5-meter tall gray tree. It was very, very small, only the size of a pigeon's egg. The flower had not yet bloomed, but the surface of this small flower bud was enshrouded in a layer of extremely blurred and mysterious colors. It represented the mysterious gray of the desolate ancient tower. It also represented the aura of the Rai Di Seal's green lightning and golden lightning. It also represented the dark purple spirit source core's oppressive power. It also had the same mysterious aura as the void essence crystal. It also shone with a golden radiance. That was the sharp aura of the fallen sky bow. When one focused, they actually felt a sense of fear towards this little flower bud, as if its sharpness couldn't be ignored. In addition, there was a kind of divine and demonic aura that fused together. An indescribable ancient dragon aura was faintly emitted from the little flower bud. Sure enough, after each of the 6 treasures or divine ability imprints in the air above Yi Xian's sea of consciousness shot out a dark light into the body of the great tree, they actually managed to activate an extraordinary flower bud. Since there was a flower, there would definitely be results. It was clearly a fruit of the primordial spirit. Once the fruit ripened, a mature primordial spirit would step out from within like a cracked egg. It was identical to Yi Xian's primordial spirit. It was the fusion of the treasures and divine ability imprints in his sea of consciousness with Yi Xian's primordial spirit. It was like a true primordial spirit clone. Not only was this primordial spirit flawless, it was also something that was nurtured innately. No matter which treasure body it entered, it wouldn't face the shackles of cultivation growth. It would be the same as Yi Xian's primordial spirit. As long as it had the opportunity, as long as it had the time, it would continue to grow healthily. Its future was limitless, and its Tao would be unobstructed. Unfortunately, at this moment, the 6 treasures and divine ability imprints in Yi Xian's sea of consciousness had all been injected with a ray of light into the gray tree. Even if they were injected again, it would be ineffective. At this moment, the gray tree had stopped evolving because it didn't have this level of external energy to nourish it. It was about to stop evolving and stop at the peak of a small budding flower bud. If that was really the case, it would probably take a long time for this primordial spirit to be truly complete. The tiny flower bud would have to grow slowly. In the end, the flower would bloom, and then the flower would wither and give birth to a fruit. Other than that, the tiny primordial spirit fruit would have to grow slowly. When it was fully ripe, the egg would crack, and the primordial spirit would be able to take its first step out. This process might take dozens of years. The primordial spirit seed planted by Yi Xian's primordial spirit had grown from a tiny seed into a gray tree that was 2.5 meters tall. It even gave birth to a tiny flower bud. It could only be considered to have completed half of the journey. The flower that would bloom and give birth to the fruit would be the other half of the journey. From this point of view, this kind of clone originally required 100 years to cultivate, but now, it had only been shortened by half. If Yi Xian wanted to completely condense this clone's primordial spirit, he would need another 50 years. Obviously, Yi Xian couldn't wait for such a long time. The headless infant corpse couldn't wait either. Whoosh! Just as the gray tree stopped growing and the tiny flower bud at the top of the tree stopped growing, the left chest of the primordial spirit clone that was sitting cross-legged in the primordial spirit clone's treasure body suddenly flashed. The infant corpse tattoo that was branded on the primordial spirit clone's left chest in the form of a corpse lamp finally made its move. Although it was just a weak ray of light, the mysterious energy it contained was far superior to the 6 treasures and the divine ability brand in Yi Xian's sea of consciousness. Before this, even the Rai Di Seal and the Tower of Antiquities inheritance that were suspended in the middle of the sea of consciousness only shot out a ray of light that made the gray tree grow by half a meter. Then, the next ray of light had to be shot in before the tree could continue to grow. At this moment, the ray of light from the corpse lamp tattoo was injected into the gray tree. The gray tree that was originally 2.5 meters tall actually grew by half a meter in the blink of an eye. In less than half a breath, it had grown to 10 feet tall. The tree was completely strengthened and didn't continue to grow. But all this was not over yet. Although the green tree didn't continue to grow, the power of the ray of light from the corpse lamp tattoo still continued to spread and affect the small flower bud at the top of the tree. In less than a breath, the flower bud that was originally the size of a pigeon egg grew rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it was already the size of an adult's fist. Only then did it stop. But everything that followed still continued. After reaching the size of a fist, the growth of the flower bud had come to an end. The flower bud began to bloom slowly, faster and faster. In less than a minute, the entire flower bud was completely in full bloom, emitting a dazzling light like a dream. This process didn't last long. In just 3 breaths, it was over. The blooming spirit flower withered in half a breath. The flower bud turned into a light rain and sank into the tree. In an instant, a small fruit that also emitted a mysterious dazzling light was born at the end of the stem. Until now, it still hadn't come to an end. The mysterious ray of light that shot out from the corpse lamp tattoo contained terrifying energy. It was comparable to the ray of light contributed by the 6 treasures and the divine ability brand in the Sea of Consciousness, as well as the energy flow provided by the innate treasure body. Chapter 3188. Translator, Transan Editor. Transan innate primordial spirit. At this moment, everything in Xianxia's Sea of Consciousness was filled with endless dreamy aura. Above the Sea of Consciousness, the 6 treasures and the divine ability brand emitted a mysterious aura. They were silent and slowly rotating on their own. Below, the turbulent Sea of Consciousness was roaring endlessly. At the center of this majestic Sea of Consciousness was a monstrous tree. A gray Mongolian tree, about 10 feet tall, was floating in the air, emitting a blurred mottled glow. There was also a kind of invisible ancient aura vaguely leaking out from it. At the top of this monstrous tree, where the spirit flower had been in full bloom, there was a fist-sized strange fruit that was also enshrouded in a mottled brilliance. It released tens of thousands of rays of light, illuminating the entire Sea of Consciousness of Xianxia's true body. A thick desolate aura was raging and surging. Boom! An explosive sound suddenly sounded in the Sea of Consciousness of Xianxia's true body. The fist-sized strange fruit at the top of the monstrous tree released tens of thousands of rays of light. A 3-inch tall figure stepped out of it and opened its eyes. The spirit seed had finally matured. The innate primordial spirit was born. The innate primordial spirit figure was exactly the same as Xianxia's true body. There were no slight differences between its eyebrows. It was like a copy of Xianxia's true body. As the little primordial spirit walked out of the fist-sized primordial spirit fruit, it silently floated in the air above Xianxia's Sea of Consciousness. At this moment, the small gray tree that was originally rooted in the waves of his Sea of Consciousness started to wither at an extremely fast speed. It was as if its mission had been completed. After blooming to the extreme, from this moment on, it would rapidly move towards complete annihilation. In fact, this was indeed the case. From the top of the monstrous tree where the spirit fruit was originally located, the entire monstrous tree, from top to bottom, instantly turned into gray spots of light at a speed visible to the naked eye and fell into the Sea of Consciousness below. The whole process only lasted for a short breath. This monstrous tree that was originally about 10 feet tall completely disappeared. All the trees turned into gray spots of light and merged into Xianxia's Sea of Consciousness as if they were regurgitated. Like flowers falling into the soil, they nourished the soil below. Without a doubt, Xianxia's true body's cultivation base and strength unknowingly rose a little. As for what realm he had reached now, it was still unknown. In the next moment, the energy that had flowed from outside Xianxia's true body and was refined by the treasure avatar finally completely disappeared. Even the avatar that nurtured true body, no energy no longer flowed into Xianxia's true body. The mysterious whirlpool formed by the devouring innate skill outside the treasure avatar disappeared in the blink of an eye. The treasure avatar that was sitting cross-legged in the void-killing array was completely revealed. In the surrounding void, a large number of wreckages of battleships and various resources were floating. However, at this moment, whether it was the wreckage of the battleships or the various resources, they had all become gray and dull. The energy and essence in them had been completely absorbed by the invisible devouring innate skill formed by the treasure avatar. The same was true for the starry sky masters who fell out of these collapsed fortresses and battleships. Even the 2 cosmic realm masters of the Federation of the Second Universe were unable to resist this terrifying and invisible devouring innate skill when they had no way to escape. Like the other starry sky masters, they had all turned into withered corpses. The power of cultivation, vitality, and blood in their bodies had all been drained away and turned into resources that aided the growth of Xianxia's true body and the birth of the innate primordial spirit. However, although everything in the outside world had ended, Everything that was happening in Yi Xian's true body inside the treasure avatar was clearly still going on. Therefore, the primordial spirit of Yi Xian's true body, which had entered the treasure avatar's true body, was still paying attention. It was as if it was cultivating. This directly led to the treasure avatar's true body still sitting cross-legged in the void of the killing array with its eyes tightly closed. At the same time, in the sea of consciousness of Yi Xian's true body within the treasure avatar's true body. Whoosh! The sea of consciousness, which represented Yi Xian's true body's cultivation and strength, was surging with waves. The sound of crashing waves reverberated endlessly, revealing a majestic and mighty aura. At this moment, as if they had sensed something or resonated with something, the few treasures and divine ability brands that were suspended above the sea of consciousness all released different and mysterious radiances at the same time. The small golden bow released a dazzling golden light. On it, the phantom of an ancient Xianxia could be faintly seen, and a pair of demonic wings on its back flapped gently. The black gold dragon scale also released a dazzling golden light, and a giant phantom of a divine dragon with black gold scales suddenly appeared. It had the aura of the golden divine dragon and the majesty of the primordial demon dragon candle dragon. A ray of light shot out from the void essence crystal and turned into the figure of the void ladle, which was faintly discernible. All of a sudden, a waterfall of pure grade 7 mind power gushed out of his mind source core. As it fell down, it disappeared into the void above his mind without stopping. In the center, the Thunder Emperor seal suddenly shone with a green-gold light. Countless green-colored thunderbolts densely exploded on the surface of the Thunder Seal, endlessly. Within the thunderbolts, there were even countless bolts of golden lightning that stretched out and spat out. Vaguely, there seemed to be 9 small green thunder origin beads rolling endlessly in the dense thunder mist rising from the Rai-D seal. In addition, the small desolate ancient inheritance tower suddenly released an endless gray chaotic aura. For a moment, countless phantoms of desolate ancient creatures rapidly appeared and disappeared around the tower. In less than half a breath, there were dozens of phantoms. They were all existences that had appeared on the 9th floor of the desolate ancient inheritance tower during the desolate ancient destruction battle. Moreover, every one of them was a supreme master of the desolation, including the supreme master of the desolation who was suspected to be on the opposing side of the headless infant corpse formation. But things were not over yet. In the next moment, from the sea of cultivation below, endless waves of knowledge sea suddenly surged up like a tsunami. The entire vast sea of knowledge sea came to life, completely churning. Right in the middle, an enormous starry sky giant tortoise slowly emerged from the depths of his knowledge sea. Every piece of shell on the tortoise's back was branded with countless mysterious runes. This starry sky giant tortoise represented the incomplete version of the Dongshu technique that Yi Xian had cultivated. It had a mysterious connection with the Dongshu giant tortoise, so at this moment, the phantom of this supreme giant tortoise had appeared. For a moment, in Yi Xian's sea of consciousness, all the desolate ancient inheritances and supreme treasures had appeared. However, this was not the end. Screech! An earth-shattering demonic roar suddenly tore the sky above the sea of consciousness. An incomparably huge black dragon phantom rushed in. On its neck, there was clearly a small corpse lamp brand. Then, a huge blood-red curved horn also rushed in. It was the Weeping Soul blood horn. Behind it, there was a faint shadow of a Weeping Soul blood ape, but it was extremely faint.